Hi friends, if you like watching my videos, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, put a like, and do not forget to click on the bell. Enjoy watching! Lady Erica sat in her room while her assistants combed her hair. At this time, another of them came in, alerting her that the Emperor had arrived. The girl bowed her head down and looked downcast on the day of the long-awaited engagement. Erica thought about what the engagement might release her. After assuring everyone that everything was in order, the girl put on her veil and continued her preparations for the soon-to-be banquet. It was raining outside when Count Beckman joined the gathering. On the death of the Guibi, the concubine had lasted the longest and died falling out of a tower window. So, to choose a new candidate to take her place was an excuse to gather in such bad weather, not to leave the place closest to the emperor empty for too long. One of the best options that the emperor personally chose was the daughter of Kor Bengenbeck, Lord of North End, Northern Border Region. The girl had already reached the right age, but there was one nuance. Erica had a scar, and according to the people living at the time, girls with a scar bring bad luck, so there was no doubt that the Lord would agree to the engagement. Back at the castle, Aunt Julia yelled at the girl, while the assistant tried to apply ointment to Erica's scar. The blonde's cousin mocked her and her scar, along with her mother, while the maid carefully tried to do her job. As soon as it was over, Erica ran out of the room in tears because of her aunt's reproaches. Every time Julia wanted to insult the girl, she called her an ill-mannered stray cat. But in fact, all these words were addressed to Erica's mother, who was no longer alive. As a child, because of her aunt's bad attitude, the girl tried to escape from the North End, but the North is too harsh a place for a child. So she almost died, buried in a snow pit. She managed to escape. After that, Erica did not make an attempt to escape, but every time she dreamed of the warm south, a beautiful golden castle by the sea, and a young man sitting on a throne in the middle of the castle. As the girl lay daydreaming on her bed, a maid entered the room, alerting her that the master had arrived at the manor and was calling her daughter in to speak. Her father rarely called Erica to talk, so she was surprised. Upon entering the room, the girl noticed that the master had a strange expression on his face. It meant that something had obviously happened. The man greeted the girl and warned her that her marriage had already been decided, and she should start preparing for the engagement. Erica couldn't believe that the engagement had already been confirmed, and her fiancé would be an emperor from the greatest family on the entire continent, the ruler of Lancia, Karl Lakin. Melinda, Erica's assistant, was reassuring the girl before the approaching engagement. The bride was afraid of what would happen outside the walls of the North End. In fact, she was afraid not of marriage, but of the emperor's reaction to her scar, and because of it, she would tarnish the name of the imperial family and not live up to her father's expectations. But despite this, Erica was determined to overcome her fear. At night, the blonde had a nightmare where she found herself in a burning building and tried to get out of there or call for help. But when she saw the exit, she ran towards it, fell, tripped over her own foot and could not get out. Erica woke up in tears, thought about her dream and looked out the window. Their garden had changed a lot for the better in such a short time. Thought again about the engagement and how she shouldn't let her father down for the sake of their position in society. The day of the engagement came. The girl put on her beautiful white dress, but she looked miserable in front of the guests present, and her father did not even look in her direction. The heroine noticed grapes on the table, a southern fruit that doesn't grow in her area, so she fearfully decided to try them, at which time she was called out, saying that the emperor had already arrived for the celebration. The boy took the bride's hand, which made her feel painful. Tears came to her eyes. Erica met Karl's eyes. The thought that the emperor looked quite scary, and his eyes reminded her of her nightmares flashed through her mind. The emperor took the girl by the chin, lifted her head, and looked into eyes full of tears, asked the servants to take Erica away to her chambers because of the bride's condition. As the heroine was led away to her bedroom, Karl began to reflect on his first meeting with his Guibi, noting that she was scared out of her wits and did not even dare to taste the grapes. Darcy and Aunt Julia were discussing what had happened to Erica when they noticed a beautiful stranger, Britta, daughter of the warden of the Leon fortress in the north. She was on close terms with the emperor. Judging from the girl's appearance, one got the impression that she was stupid. So, the woman decided that they could take advantage of her position in front of Karl to achieve their goals. Erica sat in her chambers, still shaking from what had happened. Melinda knocked on her door to see how her packing for the move was going. While the girls were talking, Aunt Julia entered the bedroom to see her niece one last time, happy that the blonde was leaving the North End. The woman decided to scare the bride by saying that Karl had killed all his wives and Gwibby, so she should be careful with the young man by telling her the details of these cases. Erica began to deny everything her aunt had said, thinking she was lying. Julia was aware of her niece's lifelong longing for freedom and offered her one last chance to escape in the morning through the back door with all the jewelry she had been given at her engagement party to live off of for the rest of her life. The bride realized that the woman decided to deceive the emperor and put her daughter Darcy in Erica's place, but the girl decided to think about this option because she always dreamed of being free. At night, Karl was reading a book in his bedroom when Britta knocked on his door, offering to give him a massage after a hard march to the north. For more effect, the emperor's crony closed his eyes. When the girl finished with the massage, the emperor had already fallen asleep. Julia met Britta in the hallway of the manor and talked to her about how her relationship with Karl could take a turn for the worse because of the engagement, turning the closer against her fiancé, assuring her that she could help her get rid of Erica. The aunt suggested a plan: put His Majesty to sleep with a massage so that Darcy would earn the emperor's favour. Because she is quite a beautiful girl, the young man will definitely notice it, and if everything goes as it should, Britta will keep her position in front of Karl. In addition, she will receive gratitude from the bride's family. Darcy entered the emperor's room. He grabbed her hand with anger and distrust, thinking that the girl was going to kill him. The girls, with a tremor in their voices, replied that they did not allow the thought of killing His Majesty. Darcy, not knowing how to get out of it, said that she snuck up on the emperor because she fell in love with Karl. These words interested the guy. The emperor turned to Britta, saying that she had disappointed him, which made the girl fall to her knees, apologizing. His Majesty called for the guards to throw Britta into the river. She grabbed the guy's hand and tearfully begged him to give her another chance, but he paid no attention to her. Afterwards, Karl turned to Darcy, who was standing there all in tears, to do something that could be worse than death to a lady of the Gwibby family. Julia came to Darcy's chambers after her conversation with Britta. Full of confidence in her plan, mother and daughter were discussing the girl's happy future with the emperor, which could be hindered by Maria's daughter Erica, and she should be the one to pay for everything her mother had done. Lahotte found himself in an unknown place, turned his head and noticed his wife Mary there, who touched him, calling him by name. The man woke up in tears, again remembering the past, the war, the death of his wife, the loneliness. The Lord clenched his hand into a fist, remembering Maria's last wish. To protect her loved ones and the innocents didn't have any of the suffering their couple had endured. Erica knocked on her father's chambers and he let her in. The girl entered, asking why Lahotte was not at the last banquet before he left. The man replied that he had to finish the castle on the border to prevent a repeat of the war that happened 11 years ago. The Lord inquired why the daughter had stopped by. The heroine thought about telling him about what happened during the night, but decided not to start that topic, so decided to ask about her scar. The father reassured his daughter, assuring her that the emperor was aware of her scar, and their meeting was destined by fate because Karl had the same wounds as Erica. Melinda's voice came from the corridor, reminding her that it was time to depart. Her father offered to say goodbye to Aunt Julia, but the girl refused, asking only for one thing: to brutally interrogate the man standing at the back gate of the estate. Erica said goodbye to the Lord, and he called his assistant to fulfill his daughter's request. The girl sat in the carriage remembering Julia's words, but decided for herself that everything she does now is for her father's sake. Cascade came to the bride, responsible for the escort, brought the lady a eunuch so that she would not get bored on the road, but Erica refused. Rudy came to her, a eunuch, quite smart, well-mannered guy. Lahotte's aide came into his office, saying that the interrogated man had confessed that he had been ordered to wait at the gate of the manor, and when the girl came out of there to take her away and get rid of her, the Lord was furious. The man quickly entered the room where Julia and Darcy sat. The Lord's tear-stained niece immediately began apologizing for her mother, but he paid no attention to her, demanding only an explanation from her mother herself. The woman screamed that Erica deserved to die because of her foul witch blood. Lahoth stopped her because she started insulting his wife Maria, but Julia argued that her death was for the best. If it hadn't happened, he wouldn't have been able to become lord. The man became angry with his sister, threatening to send her to an island in the sea where she would spend her remaining days alone, then walked out, slamming the door. The lord was met in the hallway by Melinda, who handed him a pouch from Erica containing coins to buy bricks for his father's residence in the new castle on the border. The maid reminded him that the lord's daughter lived her life always thinking first of Lahoth's welfare and then thinking of herself, the man cried. Erica rode in the carriage with the eunuch, assuring her that she didn't need much tutelage. She could do everything on her own. Rudy answered her in a slightly rough tone, which made the mistress anxious. Her hands trembled. In an uncertain voice, she tried to say something to brighten up the awkward pause, but it only made things worse. The carriage stopped and the guy got out, warning Erica that they would make a brief stop to feed the horses so the animals could take a little break. The lady saw in the window a lovely landscape and ducks in the distance. But Rudy suggested that they were geese rather than ducks, because the colours of their feathers differed. And to be sure of anyone's rightness, the bride suggested going to the pond where the birds lived. The eunuch objected, but the blonde did not listen to him and went out on her own, so the attendant had to run after her. The young men came to the pond, enjoying the view. Rudy pointed in the direction where a duck was seen. The guy looked closely and was frightened by what he saw. The eunuch came closer and noticed a person lying on the ground, immediately shouted to Erica to return to the carriage. But she did not listen and continued to look at the find. Seeing similar facial features, it turned out to be Britta. At this time, Emperor Karl approached them, replied with a smirk that he assumed the girl would be carried farther downstream, ordered her to be placed in a coffin and sent to the chief of the Leon fortress, who was her father. Erica was scared and angry at the same time, once again convinced that her fiancé was the real devil. Melinda was reading the little mistress a book about demons, creatures that laugh in the dark, glowing with their bright red eyes. The girl was very frightened by it. Erica and Rudy were still on their way to the capital. The girl was unconscious. The eunuch wondered why she still couldn't wake up. After all, the medicine had already been drunk and she was still weak. The girl dreamed of the same golden castle by the sea from her dream. She stood on the shore looking out into the distance. Cascade looked into the carriage, saying that Erica had arrived in the capital, but the mistress was still unconscious. Karl noticed it, but the person in charge of the escort assumed that the girl was tired from the trip. Therefore, is in such a state, everyone tried to bring the lady to her senses, but all attempts were useless. Rudy called out the emperor when a lamp hanging on the carriage fell on him. His Majesty shouted. The boys got into a scuffle. Erica opened her eyes from the noise, but still through her sleep asked Rudy to wake her up. Karl started to get angry that his bride was calling him by a different name while he stood over her, but the eunuch distracted him by warning him that the eunuch had been assigned to escort the girl to the capital. The emperor looked at him with his scarlet, evil eyes. The attendant wondered why His Majesty had come by carriage, for this had never happened before. Rudy explained that the girl had been prescribed medication so that she could finally fall asleep on the trip. But it had worked too late. The first time she had fallen unconscious. The second time she had almost fallen. And it was only on the third that she had managed to fall asleep. Karl inquired when he could see his bride conscious. He stroked Erica's head, took her chin and lifted her face. By this time, the mistress was beginning to regain consciousness. The girl looked her fiancé in the eyes, a little afraid of him. Erica squirmed and covered herself with her hands, with pleas to stop, which scared the guy. Erica asked the emperor to stop looking at her with those eyes, which made His Majesty a little shocked, because she was the first person to say such a thing to his face. Her mistress was embarrassed, and Karl crouched close to her, putting his arm around her to comfort her, but warning her that he would not forgive such words a second time, and she should be careful if the girl valued her life. Cascade offered to take Erica to the Northern Palace to get some rest after the long trip. The emperor stared after them for a long time, thinking about her words. Rudy stood in front of the red-haired lady, head bowed, answering questions about the unknown girl. It was Claudel, the emperor's most powerful concubine. Sitting surrounded by men who showered her with compliments, She noticed Rudy and turned to him. The girl began to ask the eunuch about Erica's reaction to the found body of Brita, considering the bride weak because of her behavior at the banquet. The guy told that when the body was transferred into the coffin, the mistress covered it with furs, and all the rest of the way, no one said a word. Claudel reached out, once again expressing her uncertainty about Erica, asked Rudy if the lad thought she was beautiful. The eunuch hesitated and replied that if the lady had asked the coachman, for example, the latter would have said that the lady was beautiful. But Rudy knows how beautiful Claudel is, but cannot give a clear answer. The boy reminded the lady of her promise. The girl snapped her fingers, and in her hands was a valuable, long-awaited reward, a eunuch's uniform with a green collar. The colour of the collar indicates the status of the eunuch. White and yellow collar means low rank. They do housework, and green collar means belonging to the third class. Claudel praised the young man for his loyalty, and the fact that he was the only one of all the eunuchs who had tried to get closer to the Fox Cascade had found success. The concubine called Rudy closer and handed him his long-awaited new uniform. Claudel had ordered the eunuch to stay by Erica's side for a while so that she could adjust to her new life in the capital. But she shouldn't forget who his real mistress was. Rudy began to think about what he should do, and there were several options in his head. The first was to watch Erica as Claudel's henchman, and at the right moment to reveal to the concubine the weaknesses of the mistress. But if the bride was at a disadvantage, the eunuch would be there too, and it was not clear whether the mistress would help him in this situation. The second option was that the guy would have to live quietly with the mistress, quieter than water, lower than grass. But there was a chance that Rudy would eventually die and just rot somewhere in the dirt. The third option seemed the most ideal for him, not to die as a pawn of Claudel, or fade into the shadows with Erica and return to his Louise. Rudy called out to the mistress and began shouting in her face for her to get well enough to meet His Majesty before he forgot about her, warning her that enemies were waiting everywhere and there was a chance she'd just get lost in the middle of the harem. The girl looked at the eunuch with frightened eyes and said with hesitations that she preferred to be forgotten rather than executed. The boy was surprised. Rudy asked what Erica meant. She explained to the boy that she had heard that the emperor's bed was a platform for execution. The number of concubines killed exceeded dozens. The girl did not want to be part of that number at all. The eunuch tried to calm the bride, but the attempts were useless, so he cancelled today's service for her and recommended a maid, although he was expressly forbidden to do so. After the death of the emperor, Karl Larkin was forced to ascend the throne at the age of 20 and, along with experienced politicians, made invaluable contributions to the shaping of the country. But the new policy was no different from the war. For his own sake, the young emperor turned the law into a weapon, combining the laws of the 6 kings into one new one, which made the nobility fiercely resentful. When their discontent reached its limit, Karl had to bare his sword. In the process of rebellion, the titles of the families were revoked. They became commoners. Half of the imperial palace was covered in blood. His Majesty stood in the worship hall waiting for his bride, but Cascade warned that the girl would not be able to attend today due to ill health after a long trip. Hearing this, Karl silently turned around and left the hall. In another room were girls. With him was a goat they were petting. One of them was reciting a prayer. He looked in their direction with his baleful gaze and swung his sword to strike several of them. Erica's new maid, Liz, was getting the girl cleaned up for the first official reception in the girl's life. Rudy, hearing that it would be the mistress's first official event, wondered how she lived in the north. Erica said that before moving here, her main social circle was the servants from their estate, and with them she learned to hunt, make firewood, and other similar things. Liz and Rudy asked the mistress not to tell such things in front of the emperor, and decided that today they would teach her the simplest of things, and tomorrow they would start the girl diligently. The maid explained that the harem here consisted of 4 palaces, east, west, north, south, and the young lady should study the aristocrats of the Assur capital so that she would know who she was socializing with in the future. After much study, Erica sat down to eat dinner, and in the hallway she heard the voices of passers-by discussing the emperor's murder of the priestesses at the last service. The bride froze with consternation on her face. Erica listened to talk about what had happened at the service, where the murder of the priestesses had taken place, in all the details that were known to passers-by in the hallway. When she heard that the murdered were girls, she dropped the cutlery from her hands. The mistress remembered her father's words about knowing everything about the emperor, but began to worry about the fact that if she became one of the dead concubines, what kind of reaction the Lord of the North End would have. She must not let her death at the hands of Karl happen. Erica got up from the table and told her maid that she wanted to take a bath. Liz suspected something wrong when she saw that the girl hadn't even touched her dinner. The girl started to help mistress with washing, but the bride asked to be left alone, assuring her that she could handle it on her own. Erica's next day started with classes. This time she was learning how to walk, stand, and keep her face properly. Mistress felt like a puppet and was sure she couldn't cope, so Liz suggested switching to a ballroom dancing class. The heroine tried her best, but not all attempts to walk across the room were unsuccessful, which made the girl cry, upset that she wouldn't be able to live up to the hopes of her beloved father. Liz sat down to comfort mistress. At that moment, Rudy entered the room. The eunuch came to the girls to warn Erica of an invitation to a tea party from Mistress Ludinia of the Western Palace. The concubine was flustered at the news and replied that she would not be going because she did not think she was ready for such an event. Liz ordered the guy to send the email back and offered to finish the class for today. Erica was immensely grateful for this solution to the problems. Karl received a letter as he sat in his study drinking wine. It stated that the Lord of the North End had led the Rangers, along with the knights of the families of the North, and travelled to Lian Fortress. The councillor who brought the notice wondered why lead an army with such a force to the fortress if there were no troops in Lian. The emperor countered that it was worth being careful with Lian and being personally convinced that there was no treaty between the outcasts, and on top of that, this situation was a good way to test the loyalty of the North. After a short consideration, Karl noticed a wine he didn't quite like and asked where it was from. The councillor told him it was from Mount Corvo, which was considered one of the best producers of wine. This made the emperor wonder if he had better drinks in his cellars. His Majesty rose from his chair and began to get ready for somewhere. His assistant offered him to wear a brooch with a rose, but he stopped him, choosing a piece of jewellery with a brush of grapes. While it was attached to the cape, the man asked where the emperor was going. Karl was going to visit the Northern Palace. Rudy and Erica went for a walk in the garden. The eunuch was worried about the mistress because of her fall in ballroom dancing class. She confirmed that she was fine, and there was no need to worry. She said she was willing to fall 100 more times so that she could have free time to walk as often as possible. The heroine noticed that this place had not been tended to for a long time, because in many places there was moss, cobwebs, and in general, it did not look very well maintained. The guy saw that Erica got her hands dirty in the fountain, was afraid for her, and wiped them with his handkerchief, warning her that she should not touch similar things, and he would definitely call a gardener in the next few days to tidy up everything. Mistress was clearly in a better mood, unlike Rudy, who was looking at the overgrown garden, comparing it to his hopeless future. In the thicket, the girl noticed a path that led to the unknown, and called her companion to find out what was at the end of this path. But the eunuch ignored her, so the heroine went alone. The enveloping cold, the smell of frost, and the many small paths reminded Erica of her ancestral home, full of painful memories from which she wanted to leave. The girl was full of hope that one day she would remember the snow-covered castle as a good time in her life. The mistress walked along the path further and noticed bright fruits. They turned out to be raspberries. She picked one berry to try. The taste of the berry brought Erica in full delight. The bride ate raspberries one after another, but suddenly she remembered about Rudy and his condition. It seemed to her that he was depressed, so she decided to please him by picking some berries for him. Erica picked some fruit for the eunuch and was about to leave when she heard the emperor's voice behind her, which startled her so much that she dropped everything she had picked. Liz told Karl that the mistress had gone out for a walk in the garden. This made the man a little angry because he was well aware of the state of his possessions. His Majesty went out with his assistant Germaine into the garden to find the girl, and asked why his bride's room was in such a deplorable state. It turned out that the North Palace was the home of the first Empress of House Oster, and after her death, no one had taken care of the castle. Karl immediately sensed the presence of the spirit of this very owner of the North Palace. His Majesty made the decision to walk a little through the garden by himself. Each step was as unpleasant as possible for him, but as soon as he saw Erica in the crimson bushes, his heart softened a little. Erica saw the Emperor and immediately dropped all the raspberries she had picked from her hem for Rudy to greet her fiancé. Karl examined his concubine from head to toe and noticed strange stains that looked very much like blood, which frightened the young man. He grabbed the girl's hand to help her, but the lady stopped him, saying that it was just the marks from the raspberries. The Emperor grinned and reminded Erica of the incident with the grapes on the day of the banquet, on the occasion of their engagement. The girl was embarrassed and trembling with excitement, apologized for both situations. Karl asked the girl to come closer to him, but she didn't understand what he wanted from her, so remained standing still. The guy couldn't stand it and lifted her up in his arms, then put her in front of him. As soon as Erica's feet touched the ground, she thanked her fiancé for his help. Then he asked her a question about her body. The girl panicked, thinking that the scar was visible through the transparent material of her dress, so she was confused again, not knowing what to answer. The lady was shivering again. Tears came to her eyes, but then Karl took off his cloak and covered the bride with it, for he thought she was cold in her light dress in this weather. Karl wondered why the girl who had become his Gwibi was behaving like a small child requiring supervision, but came to the conclusion that it was because she was just his hostage. Because of these thoughts, he had completely lost track of why he had come to the Northern Palace. But he remembered. The Emperor decided to inform his bride that a war is starting in the north because of Lord Lian's rebellion, and the rest of the nobles are going to oppose him. But even so, the battle won't be long because Lord Lian's troops are much weaker than his opponents. The girl fell into a stupor, trembling again with fear for her father and home. His Majesty didn't like her reaction. He concluded that he shouldn't have told his concubine that. Karl lifted his bride in his arms to lead her out of the grave garden. This embarrassed the girl so much that she accidentally hit him on the head. And to leave as soon as possible, the Emperor wanted to leave because he didn't like the place. He made a decision that he would give orders to tear the place down as soon as possible. Rudy was scared because Erica had been gone too long. When she returned, he was trying to find out if something bad had happened. Liz offered to call a healer while Mistress was getting cleaned up because she too had noticed the raspberry stain. The concubine sent her assistants to bed, assuring them that everything was fine. In the bathroom, the maid immediately decided to launder the nightie from the berry stains, and the eunuch still could not calm down because His Majesty's face seemed rather angry. Claudel was displeased when she learned of the Emperor's trip to the Northern Palace, for only Erica lived there, and she wondered what he was visiting his bride for. One of the concubine's assistants suggested calling the eunuch to find out the details of the meeting, to which he readily agreed. Rudy went into the room, where Claudel was already waiting for him. She decided to remind him who his mistress was, and who had given him a simple eunuch, a green collar, green. The girl tried to elicit from Rudy all the motives for the Emperor's trip to the Northern Palace, but he didn't know all the details, so Claudel ordered Céline, her maid, to hit the guy to help him remember. The eunuch said that the mistress has been feeling unwell lately, so the Emperor came to check on her, walked with her briefly, and left soon after. But he is not aware of the whole situation. The concubine didn't believe a word Rudy said and ordered Céline to hit him again, to which the maid refused, recalling the benefits for concubines from the Emperor if the girls were involved in political affairs. And Erica's father was on a campaign just at that moment, so the eunuch's words made sense. The boy tried once more to make his mistress believe a single word he said. Finally, the girl took pity, apologized to him, and threw the bag of coins. Rudy was walking through the castle grounds thinking about what had happened. Out of anger, he slammed his head against the fence wall and promised that he would repay his debt to Claudel. Erica woke up from the bright sunlight, which penetrated into her chambers through the window. The girl got out of bed and on the shelf noticed the same brooch with a brush of grapes, making sure that what happened during the night was not a dream. Mistress left the bedroom, surprised to see that all the maids of the northern castle had started cleaning. The cloth from the furniture had been removed, and the most important thing was that she could not find her luggage, which scared her a lot. The girl thought that she was being kicked out of the castle back home. Rudy called out to Erica, noting that she had woken up too late today and suggested she come with him. They went to the door, the eunuch pulled the knob, and the door to the luxurious bedroom opened in front of them. This luxuriously renovated room was called the Celestial Room. It had been built a long time ago, and the former emperor had given it to his favourite dancer, after which his favourite concubines began to move in. Now it was Erica's turn to live here. Suddenly, the other maids knocked with trays that were full of food. Among all these delicious dishes was a raspberry pie. Mistress immediately realised from whom all these gifts were from. Erica lay in her bed with tears in her eyes, thinking about the whole situation with her scar and what the emperor's reaction would be. At that time, Rudy entered the bedroom. The eunuch noticed the mistress's sad look, to which she replied that she was disappointed with the torn dress due to the ballroom dancing lesson. He reassured her by offering to sew a new one. Liz came into the room with a jar in her hands where the snail lived and suggested that Erica feed it new leaves when the snail ran out of greens. The mistress added more to the insect and wondered if she could call this place her home. After all, she liked it here and there were people who helped the girl. Erica had never agreed to accept help from Liz, but this time she asked the maid to help her with her water treatments. The girl took a bath and talked to the maid. Feeling very safe and secure, she wanted to enjoy this moment. Mistress asked Liz to send back those sent by the emperor when they were done, to lock up all rooms that would not be used, and to return any jewellery that had been donated to the emperor. The maid spoke of the girl becoming a gwibby, but the date of the ceremony had not yet been set, and so she should learn to behave appropriately in society with the other concubines as soon as possible, especially when she would have to go to thank the emperor. Erica was terrified of having to face His Majesty again and went underwater in the bathtub, remembering all the situations that had happened in her meetings with Karl, and admitted to herself that she didn't want to see him again. Liz wondered how a girl from a family of aristocrats could be so simple. After all, others from similar families have self-confidence and hold themselves calmly in front of the emperor. So in order not to worry about the mistress, the maid promised to think of a way to help her. In the semi-darkened room, Claudel was trying to elicit the details of Erica and Karl's lives from the maids who were helping with the cleaning in the northern palace. The concubine ordered Celine to once again slap the helpers, to which one of the girls, almost screaming, decided to tell about Liz's laundry last night. Claudel wondered why she personally would be doing laundry at a time like this. One of the maids suggested that she might be hiding something. The girl stepped on the narrator's hand, then told her to go on further. She had tears coming out from the pain. The assistant said that she had helped her pour vinegar into the basin, and then Liz had left. But she noticed that there was a white garment that looked like a nightgown with a red stain on it that looked like blood. So it made sense why the emperor had given Erica the northern palace. After these words, Claudel felt bad. Selina helped her not to fall down and ordered her to get rid of those two maids. After that, she started to reassure her mistress that the Gweeby was in no way comparable to the concubine, and she would always be the best for His Majesty. If anything happened, they would get rid of her as before. Erica was led to the shrine of the goddess, the whitewashed building where the emperor's services are held. There were many different inscriptions on one of the pillars. Liz told her that it was a wishing pillar. After the story, the lady folded her hands, closed her eyes, and began to wish for the well-being of her father and all the troops of the north, so that no one would be harmed during the war. Just then, the girl was called by Rudy, warning her that the service was about to begin. As soon as she finished her prayer, she went to the hall. Liz brushed Erica's beautiful golden hair, advising that it was worth attending the service if the girl didn't want to thank the emperor in person. Since this was her first service, mere presence would suffice. The service is dedicated to the arrival of spring, so the emperor and the aristocrats will have to go around the nearby farmland, so it won't be a long process. Rudy accompanied Erica to her first reception, as long as the young man went quietly. Then the girl begged the goddess to prevent her from meeting His Majesty face to face. The eunuch laughed at the mistress, saying that the goddess would never fulfill her wishes because she valued the peace and harmony of the couple. They came to a flower bed. The sight of it delighted the girl, and she plucked one of the flowers. Rudy called it the lucky flower, and offered to give it to the emperor, to which the girl objected, replying that she would keep it for herself. Karl was sitting in his office dealing with some papers when one of his aides came in. He brought news that there are suspicions that the lords and aristocrats of Wix have built a secret gambling house in the basement of the castle, and it was revealed because Wix's mine is empty, there is nothing to extract from there, but the lord fills it with gold coins. The emperor ordered to do nothing about this gambling house, but just keep watching. If the gold starts to move around, to report immediately. His Majesty noted that there were bigger problems, such as the epidemic in the Calaco area, at which time another aide came in with a list of participants in the ceremony. Cascade and the second servant decided to read the list. Noticing Erica on the guest list, everyone was surprised, especially the emperor, for they all knew it was her first time out. It was time to go out to worship. There were many nobles gathered at the event. The mistress was surprised and remarked that Liz was right when she said that she didn't stand out at all among the other aristocrats in her outfit, and didn't want to engage in dialogue with the stranger at all. Rudy, together with his concubine, sat down in their seat. The eunuch began to tell of Mistress Ludinia of the Western Palace, from whom the girl had received an invitation to tea, and next to her sat Libra of Rubital. The bells rang to warn of the beginning of the service. The emperor appeared. Cascade bowed to him. A mysterious wooden box stood before His Majesty. All present bowed their heads. Erica, finding the right moment, decided to take a closer look at what was going on. No sooner had the girl stretched her neck out to examine the box, almost immediately Karl noticed her. His gaze startled the girl again. Erica felt sick to her stomach, causing a cold sweat to cover her face. Rudy turned his attention to her, but the girl said she was fine. Torches were lit around the wooden box. Cascade presented this year's harvest on a small cushion. A prayer ceremony began. Karl took nature's gifts and threw them into the fire. Then it was over. After the ceremony was over, the emperor spoke to the aristocrats, Erica watching from afar. The concubine heard a nagging voice not far from her. Turning her head, the girl saw two old women, one of whom was actively swearing at everything around her. The bride rushed to the two grandmothers to offer them her help, to which the women willingly agreed. The old lady noted that she had never seen the young lady here, so she wondered where she was from. Only the girl was about to answer, as the lady offered to guess her family. Based only on Erica's appearance, the woman guessed where the girl came from, which surprised the bride. While the heroine was talking to the old lady, she noticed how the emperor was leaving. One of His Majesty's aides approached the ladies to deliver a message from Karl. Much to Lady Mavrinth's surprise, the lad explained that Erica was the emperor's bride, to which the old lady was even more surprised. The assistant offered the concubine to convey through him what she wanted to say to the emperor. After this phrase, the girl took out a letter from her pocket, taking the message the guy left. Lady Mavrinth expressed aloud her surprise at the fact that she was the very bride of His Majesty, and Karl received the letter and read it with pleasure. A friend of the old lady's called her, so she had to leave. She offered Erica her help, which, if anything, she could get at the Southern Palace, where Lady Mavrinth lives. Rudy approached the bride, telling her who the two ladies were. These women turned out to be the mothers of Kalia and Shanant, the mothers of the lords of those places. The eunuch believed that one day Erica could become one of them. The bride laughed at the thought, but she looked behind Rudy's back and was startled, for not far from them stood the emperor, glaring menacingly at some girl. The stranger fell to her knees. The heroine stammered, trying to say something to the eunuch. The girl sat on her knees with tears in her eyes, the others around her laughing at her. Erica tugged at Rudy's sleeve, asking him to leave, but the eunuch refused, reasoning that leaving right now would equate to condemning the emperor's actions. The stranger was lifted from the ground to be led away, but she broke free from the guard's grasp to apologize to His Majesty, to which the latter shouted in her face to leave as quickly as possible. Karl punched the girl, causing her to take a step back and try to remove herself from the place to pass. She yelled at Erica, shoving her shoulder. The emperor noticed this and ordered the girl to stop. She turned around, all shaking with fear, begging for pity on her. The guy paid no heed to her words, only ordered her ankle to be chopped off. The guilty girl couldn't believe it, tried to run up to the emperor. Erica looked at all this. She too had tears in her eyes. She was just thinking about the opportune moment to leave. His Majesty approached the bride with a request to open her palms. She obeyed with trembling in her fingers and dropped the flower she had picked earlier in the flower bed. Karl bent down and picked up the flower, with the words that he should have given it to her instead of the note, but Erika replied that the flower was not meant for him and asked for it back. The boy looked at her, ordering her to follow him. The girl obediently followed, thinking of Rudy, who was left standing among the crowd. While the pair walked to the appointed place, the Emperor decided to talk about Sierra. Erika had tears coming to her eyes. After the end of the Age of the Gods, the sun goddess returned to the heavens, ordering 100 priests to build a temple that would carry her voice for tens of thousands of years. But the goddess's handmaiden, Sierra, was left to wander the continent for the rest of her life, looking for a place where the goddess could be famous for 10,000 years. That's how Sierra found this place. Making a promise was a very simple thing to do, but keeping it was the hardest thing to do. After finishing the story, the Emperor turned to his bride, bellowed that she should not test his patience and keep her promise not only in words, but also in actions. The girl shrank back. One of the eunuchs wanted to help His Majesty but made a mistake. He received a punch in the jaw, instantly falling to the floor. Karl looked at the guy with crazy eyes. Erika covered her mouth in surprise not to make unnecessary sounds. There was only one thought in her head. He is crazy. In such a short time, the Emperor ordered the leg of the most beautiful concubine he had previously cherished to be chopped off, and a little later struck a eunuch just for dropping a piece of jewelry. Karl beckoned to Erika to do something herself and turned to the window. The bride stood in utter bewilderment. Cascade whispered in her ear to unbuckle her belt. The girl had seen it only once in her life, and that in a distant childhood, so she tried her best to figure it out on her own. During unsuccessful attempts, the bride angered the Emperor. He turned to her and shouted orders to stop doing it. Erika was no less angry, but did not say anything out loud, but only showed it with her facial expression, which made His Majesty even more mad. Not knowing what to do with the concubine, Karl just let her go, to which the girl was very happy, bowed, and tried to get away from there as soon as possible. The boy still could not restrain his anger, but the sight of the fallen flower, which he took from Erika, helped to calm down a little. And for himself, Karl decided that no matter what, the girl must live, at least until the war in the north is over. Cascade asked what he should do with the flower, to which His Majesty asked him to leave it somewhere with him. The servant offered to leave the flower in the hero's bedroom, but was very surprised that the Emperor kept the gift, rather than asking him to throw it away, or not do it himself. In the hallway, one of the concubines found the very note that Erika had written to her fiancé, laughing at her handwriting, thinking that the eunuchs under her care wrote much better than a girl from an aristocratic family. The eunuch noticed the girl and as soon as she left picked up the note, confirming her thoughts, thinking that the bride must have gotten a kick out of the fact that the Emperor's thoughts were almost impossible to predict. Cascade put the flower in a vase and continued to work onward. Erika went out for a walk in the garden, where she was called by Rudy. The girl looked at him and, upset about the recent incident, decided to ignore the guy, even though he was not guilty of anything. The eunuch wanted to know how the mistress was feeling, but the concubine was not in the mood to talk to him, so she waved him off, saying that everything was fine, and hurried away, which upset him. A lot of nobles gathered in the square to welcome Claudel and the Emperor, but together with them they brought a crocodile, and not everyone knew what kind of animal it was, so they thought it was a dragon and were frightened. The concubine asked His Majesty to look into the eyes of the beast. With the question whether the crocodile guesses that he has been caught, Karl replied that not, rather, he does not realize this thing, for he has a majestic look. Unexpectedly, Claudel asked a question about Ludendia, the girl who had her ankle chopped off, who was said to have lost her mind, screaming around the clock and cursing everyone in the world. The concubine was not upset by this. She only made sure that she was destined to do so, because she had committed many misdemeanors. One of them was the murder of Alicia of Myrsa, who was a very kind and good dancer. Often this girl danced on the railing of the terrace, which pleased the Emperor, but according to him he did not remember this lady at all. Claudel told of Alicia falling from that very railing, breaking her spine and dying after 3 days of excruciating pain. His Majesty's heart trembled. The concubine seized the moment and tried to take his hand. The girl thought it was very strange that an acrobat who could safely dance on a rope had fallen off the railing where she could safely sit. So she checked Alicia's wine, where she found a paralyzing drug that can make you lose your mind for a moment. Such effective substances are only made by Mimoy gypsies. The Emperor listened thoughtfully to Claudel's story. She concluded that Ludenia had brought the very poisoned wine to Alicia and finished speaking. The image of Alicia surfaced in Karl's mind, which made him frightened, grabbed his head, and ordered Ludenia to be hanged. After a few seconds, the Emperor remembered how the dancer had died, so ordered that the girl be kept off opium for 3 days and hanged on the very terrace from which Alicia had fallen. Claudel smirked, obeying the order. An image of Erica surfaced in Karl's mind. He said out loud that she didn't like him, which caught the concubine's attention. His Majesty asked her what she would do if someone constantly pestered her. Claudel only asked who dared pester the Emperor, after which she summoned Selene, ordering her to send Ludenia to the filthiest cell, without food or medicine, but not to let her die, to keep her alive for 3 days. Selene bowed to her mistress and removed herself to carry out the order. At this time, the concubine pondered the Emperor's words, promising herself that if anyone pestered him, she was prepared to torture that person to the point of horror. Karl rose from his seat, asking how Ludenia was able to get such a drug because it was expensive and difficult to obtain because of its properties, to which Claudel replied that such details were unknown to her. The sun was beginning to set. The concubine was about to leave when she met the girl with a beautiful piece of jewellery, complimenting her on the diamond in it. The lady thanked Claudel, telling her that a merchant from Jer had given it to her. The concubine was surprised. This very trader was Claudel's father. The girl said that he had offered to stay in Jere, but he was too old for her, whereupon she reflected that if the man had been 10 years younger, she would have been a concubine's stepmother. Claudel started to get angry. She decided that since Ludenia was no longer with her, it was worth getting rid of her because this girl knew too much. The concubine recalled a situation where the perpetrator had approached her and excitedly assured her that she would do anything to wash away the insult she had received. Claudel resented the fact that people like her often pretended to obey, but kept looking for a moment to stab her in the back. After that thought, her gaze fell on the crocodile cage. The girl grinned, turning around to get out of there. Her head was still full of thoughts. She remembered the words the Emperor had said that afternoon about this animal, objecting by saying that dignity and greatness was the lot of only the strong, not inferior animals. Erica sat in front of the dressing table, while Liz brushed her hair, saying that if it pleased her soul she could punish Rudy. The girl inquired how she could do that. The maid explained that she could blame him for disappointing her at a critical time, or simply say that she didn't like the eunuch. Mistress clutched the dress in her hands, repeating that it wasn't his fault, and anyone would have done the same thing in that situation. Rudy sat on his knees in front of Erica's bedroom door, tears coming to his eyes. The girl continued her monologue. She wondered why things were different here than at home in Spatala. Even if Aunt Julia would abuse someone, it would never come to murder. But Aunt Julia only held a stick. But here people hold swords, and whatever a person holds will be used as a weapon. Liz replied to the mistress that if she had nothing before, now, as the Emperor's bride, Erica would have a sword that everyone would fear once she became a Gwibi. In the Emperor's bathroom, the space was filled with steam from the hot water, when he had already put on his robe after long water treatments. His Majesty always took a bath for a couple hours after banquets, or socialising with his concubines. Scrubbing everything personally with a brush, some thought he might be misophobic. As soon as the Emperor entered his bedroom, where the aide was tidying up, he asked why the flower had wilted so quickly, to which he received the answer that cut flowers did not live long, and if he was not satisfied he could put it away to fetch a new one. Karl sat in his chair looking at the flower, told himself it was worth getting rid of such a habit, then asked Cascade for the papers. Liz walked into the library, where she noticed Erica knitting something enthusiastically, saw the pattern that was on the table, and immediately realised that she was trying to repeat it. The concubine greeted the maid and asked what was the strange expression on her face, to which the woman only asked where she had found the pattern. The mistress cheerfully replied that the napkin was in the basket of yarn, but it was too complicated to knit, and the girl was afraid she might mess it up and apologised to the owner in advance. Liz said that the owner would be very happy for Erica to improve her skills, but the example she took was too complicated for her, and she should look for something simpler, and the best solution for her would be a knitting mentor. The bride was surprised. The maid went on to say that it would be difficult to please His Majesty with what she had learned from the only maid. For what had happened at the ceremony she considered her fault too. Erica immediately began to deny Liz's words, claiming that neither she nor Rudy were to blame for the situation, and that the only one to blame for what had happened was the Emperor, because none of those killed deserved to die. But in the north, only the guilty were killed. The maid shouted at the mistress to stop accusing His Majesty before anyone heard her words, for if anyone found out about it, she could get in trouble. The girl knew it very well, and continued to say that the north and this place were completely different things. After this phrase, on the faces of both ladies read sadness. Liz has decided that Erica wants to elope, but why does the Lord of the North End agree with the wedding? As it's obvious the girl is totally unsuited to this place, she needs peace and quiet. Mistress spoke of going too far to stop, so she would try not to stand out. The maid took her hand to support her. Her face was sad. Liz began the story of her childhood. The lady was born on the outskirts of Assur. She roamed the streets barefoot by day and spent her nights in an alcove under the stairs of the tavern where she worked. In winter, the girl's hands and feet froze to frostbite. There was no food at all, so she had to scrounge for scraps, though she worked in the tavern near where she slept. But she didn't get a penny, not even a wage. But despite that, Liz tried to learn everything she saw, because at any moment she could lose what she had. Tears came to Erica's eyes because of the maid's story. She tried to support the lady, but she didn't accept her words, assuring her that everything was fine. The mistress talked about how she also missed the north, but didn't want to go back, and no matter what, together the girls would cope with all the difficulties. Erica thanked Liz for her support and hugged her tightly. At the same time, Rudy entered the room with an invitation to a meal for the mistress from the Emperor, and the girls immediately began to choose an outfit for the meeting, and decided on a soft blue dress with a yellow jabot. Liz wished the mistress a good journey to the water garden, where the meal would be held, and warned her that Rudy would be her escort. The bride said she shouldn't have sent the eunuch with her, as she could manage on her own, but the maid replied that it would be much safer that way, and then they left. The water garden was beautiful. There were fountains everywhere and beautiful flower beds growing. Everything was green. Rudy and Erica walked in silence to the gazebo, where the Emperor was already waiting for them. His Majesty immediately noted that the girl was late, and suggested that it might be because she took too long to choose what to wear, then compared her dress to pajamas. The girl didn't like it. She thought his words were too rude. But after a couple of seconds, her attention shifted to the nature around her. She felt more comfortable here than elsewhere. The Emperor continued his thought, joking that Erica would be more suited to a church than a dinner table right now, and suggested sending a concubine to a convent to distribute bread to the suffering, or join those making pilgrimages to the Western continent. The mistress looked at Karl in surprise, and then he offered her to leave, but she refused. The Emperor started practically reprimanding the concubine for having no idea what the real world was like, full of poor people and criminals. The guy stopped his monologue by saying that it was funny to watch the girl shaking with fear, but if she died, it would be problematic. After these words, he snapped his fingers and their lunch was brought to the table. Erica calmed down, for she had thought the Emperor would be very angry about their last meeting, but not a word was said about that day. The pair wished each other a pleasant appetite, after which they began their meal. But then Karl asked if it was all worth staying. Erica was embarrassed, but agreed. The Emperor smirked and confirmed his own words that life anywhere would be better than the North End. But the girl objected, replying that it was fine there too. The pair were served fish as they continued to speculate about life in the north. His Majesty thought it was a terribly lonely and cold place, but the colder it got there, the more beautiful the scenery looked, especially in winter, when even the clouds froze and ice flakes fell from the sky, covering everything like fog. The lady was encouraged by this conversation. She agreed with everything the groom said, and both of them were silent, eating fish in silence. But the guy was a little confused, so he asked why the girl was silent. Erica continued her companion's thought. Occasionally other things can be seen in the fog, such as the Road of Light, as the Northerners call it. They say it is a bridge to the distant sky, which lies between the two worlds. human and dragon worlds. But Carl was not impressed by this story. He thought it was a delusion of travellers frozen on a snowy mountain. The bride took offence, saying that it was no delusion. She had personally seen it, but she couldn't remember the details. The only thing that stuck in her memory was the silence around her and the glow of the world. Everything resembled a dream. The emperor got angry, asking him to stop lying to him. Erica started to get worked up as well, rising above the table and telling him that she had seen the apparition, though it was a long time ago and she couldn't remember much of it. His Majesty called the concubine stupid, then said the phrase, "He who lies can steal, he who steals can kill, and a murderer can sell his country." He never forgives such people. The bride thought of Carl, comparing that phrase to him and his actions, for he kills so easily as if it meant nothing. The couple continued their meal in silence, but after a couple of minutes the emperor turned around, started to drink the wine and spilled some of it, after which a eunuch ran up to him to see what was wrong. Without a word, His Majesty took the servant's hand, placed it on the table, and stabbed the knife into his palm, after which he only said, "Useless hands," complained about the bone he found in the fish, and wiped his lips with a napkin. Erica watched with horror on her face. The eunuch screamed in pain. The mistress rose from the table, looked angrily at her fiancé and walked over to the wounded lad who had already started crying to try and help him. Rudy watched from afar. The girl looked at the eunuch, with the thought that he might run away again right now, but instead he walked over to the table. The mistress ordered the boy to be taken away to the healer. Rudy sighed, took the eunuch under his arms, and led him away. The bride was left alone with the emperor, tension hanging between them. Carl praised the girl for her good work, but she said nothing in reply. Instead, she silently began to walk away from the dinner table. The emperor stood watching Erica, who was running the blade of the knife across her palm. The concubine crouched on her knees, swung the knife and fell on her stomach. The girl came to herself, but did not open her eyes. It seemed to her that she was lying on something pleasant, that smelled of lavender, reminding, soft, just washed linen, because of which she did not want to wake up at all. The emperor noticed that Erica had woken up, so suggested she walk on her own. After these words, she opened her eyes and screamed. Carl laughed at his bride, remembering that this was the third time he had carried her in his arms, and she was still frightened by these moments, again thinking the concubine was stupid. His Majesty noted that it was the first time he had ever seen a girl faint, still and long afterward, and before her no man had dared to sniffle in a lad's arms. Erica continued to sit in the emperor's arms as he carried her to the bedroom. At the entrance to the chambers they were greeted with a bow by Liz. Carl entered the room and placed his bride as gently as possible on the bed. They looked into each other's eyes, after which His Majesty reminded his concubine of his thanks. The girl thanked him with words and closed her eyes to get some rest. But Carl apparently wasn't going to leave, so she looked toward the door where Liz was standing, and with one look asked for her help. The emperor leaned closer to his concubine, asking if she was afraid of him, but Erica began to deny the thought. Carl called the bride stupid again, took her cheeks, and continued his thought that you could tell by her face. Erica tried to defend herself by reproaching her fiancé for constantly insulting her, but he replied that all his words would not compare to what the girl had done today when she tried to help the eunuch. He threatened that he would cut his throat in front of her, and asked her what she would do in such a situation. Carl continued to threaten that if she defended the butler one more time, he would do something to her. At this time, he squeezed her cheeks with his hand. Erica continued to lie on the bed. Tears came to her eyes. She told the emperor that her cheeks hurt a lot from his hands, so he immediately let her go. The girl sat up, grabbed her face with her hands and continued to cry. A small bloodstain showed on her lips. His Majesty noticed this and was a little frightened, for he only lightly touched Erica, comparing her to paper. The emperor shouted to the servants to call for a healer. The tears in the bride's eyes wouldn't stop. The guy yelled at her to get the concubine to look at him. Erica cried and wondered why he didn't realize how rude he was being. After those words, Liz entered the room, alerting her that the healer had arrived. The doctor went over to the girl to examine her and gave her some advice. But Carl wasn't satisfied with that. He demanded that the healer examine the wound more closely, and on automatic, he grabbed Erica's cheeks again. She yelled at him that it hurt her and bit her finger. The emperor began to scold the girl. The bride sat all in tears. The guy threatened that everything that she did now will regret after a while, and then left the bedroom. Erica immediately realized that this situation would not go away. But nevertheless, after he left, she felt much calmer. Even the events at the table today did not leave such an imprint. With these thoughts, the girl decided to lie down to rest, but she had no idea that this was a sign of the approaching end of the quiet court life. The dark-haired boy stood looking at the back of the leader. There was a horse stomping and the sound of a bugle. The leader of the troops shouted that it was time to fight. The young man stood covered in blood. His trembling hand clenched into a fist. The other palm clenched a sword. He turned his head in the direction where he noticed the dead man. His eyes filled with anger. A frightened Karl rose from the bed, trying to recover from the nightmare. He coughed, causing a eunuch to run up to him to offer him a glass of water or any other help. The emperor did not answer anything, but only drew his sword, swung it, and his face was decorated with bloodstains. Cascade looked into the bedroom. His Majesty asked to bring him something stronger instead of water. Hearing the request, the eunuch left. The guy continued to sit on the bed, exhaling and clutching the blanket in his hands, his eyes filled with tears. Karl stood in the middle of the battlefield, all stained with the blood of his enemies. Looking off into the distance, he turned around and started to approach someone and ordered the lowlife to stand up. Erica was blinded by the bright sunlight from the bedroom window. Rudy was standing in the room pulling the curtains open. The girl sat down on the bed. The eunuch noticed that something was wrong and inquired. In his opinion, the mistress did not look good. He offered to pull the curtains back, to which he received the reply that everything was fine. The concubine continued to sit on the bed and cried. Rudy crouched down beside her and wiped the tears from her cheek, then began to blame himself for daring to touch his mistress without her permission. Erica thanked the guy. He looked at her, his face flushed. The bride was embarrassed, and to avoid embarrassment said that she would get up to prepare for the class. But Rudy stopped her, warning her that in the morning she could rest, and in the afternoon she would have a spelling class, which pleased the young lady. Liz entered the room with a laundry basket and noticed the eunuch with a flushed face. She tried to talk to him, but the guy was too confused, which was uncharacteristic of him. The maid inquired what the mistress was busy with, informing her that His Majesty had appointed an audience. The eunuch asked fearfully what was the matter, but no one knew anything. Erica sat in front of the dressing table as Liz brushed her hair, preparing her for her meeting with the emperor. The girl thought it was time for her to prepare for death. The maid tried to calm the mistress, but she continued her monologue that maybe she had overdone it, but in any case, she should forget about a quiet life, and it was more likely that her last dream was a prophetic one. The concubine was silent, but in her head she didn't finish thinking about why she had been called and what she was going to do. Liz finished with her hair. The girl lay down on the table and sighed when a knock was heard on the door. An unknown man entered the bedroom with an offer to escort Erica. The maid wished mistress a good journey, whereupon she set off. Once they arrived at the place and got out of the carriage, the emperor's envoy warned that they would have to walk due to the fact that His Majesty had invited the girl outside the outer walls. Erica looked at the place where they arrived and noticed a large number of steps. The young people approached the gate, where the guards were waiting for them. The stranger said something and showed them, after which they were let through. The bride was upset because she saw the distance she would have to cover in heels, but she was more impressed by the grandeur of the fortress. The attendant began to tell the young lady that this road was specially for the emperor's concubines, and it used to be freely accessible, but now it could only be used by His Majesty's consorts, who had been chosen personally, so there was not a soul here. The place where Karl lived was called the Lion Tower, and he spent most of his time in the second palace. Erica kept thinking about how badly her feet hurt, and she wanted to rest. She decided that next time she would wear more comfortable shoes. Almost approaching the palace, the concubine took a step, but couldn't hold on, and almost fell. She was saved only by Rudy, who was standing next to her. He warned her to be careful. His face looked more serious than ever. The bride looked at him, concluding that the eunuch didn't want to see the emperor either, because no one had any good memories associated with him. Walking down the corridor of the fortress, Erica kept holding on to Rudy all the time because her legs were whining mercilessly. When they entered His Majesty's office, he was standing at the window reading some document. Karl heard voices behind him. and turned back to the visitors, noting that the girl was once again late, for she had been expected for breakfast and had not arrived until afternoon. Erica apologized and sat down on the chair next to her. She could read the pain in the heroine's face. Most of all at that moment she wanted to take off her shoes, which she did, but the shoe flew right under the emperor's feet. He noticed her and looked at the bride with a surprised look. The concubine became agitated. Karl noticed the size of the shoe. It seemed too small to him, then picked up the shoe from the floor, walked over to the girl to put it back on, grumbling that the place where she was not suitable for going barefoot. Erica handed him her foot, which was blistered, and shared her opinion that the shoes were most likely not the right size. The emperor reprimanded her for not stopping once to take a break or choose a different shoe initially, turned to Rudy and yelled at him to get a healer. All the while the eunuch was running for help. His Majesty was sitting and carefully holding the bride's leg, but out of the blue he began to scold her for bringing herself to such a state. Sergio, one of the best healers in the palace, entered the room. He was the only one available right now because the others were busy working on a cure for the plague. The healer began to question the emperor on various topics. After a couple minutes of dialogue, the emperor turned his attention to the blisters of the seated girl. Sergio told Erica how to heal her foot, emphasizing on wearing the right shoes. The concubine thanked the old man and noticed his appraising gaze, as if he knew of Liz's words about impeccable manners and did her best to show it. Karl hurried Sergio to finish and bring the medicine. Rudy entered the room with breakfast and a new pair of shoes for the mistress. The girl thanked him and started eating. The emperor got angry and yelled at the eunuch to leave. Erica stood up for the assistant, but that didn't soften his Majesty. He still wanted the butler out. And as soon as Rudy was out, Karl moved on to the subject of their meeting. He placed in front of the girl a stack of documents that spoke of a deadly epidemic that had hit the empire. The concubine continued to read, tears coming to her eyes again. Erica asked what the emperor was doing in this situation, and he replied that he was reviewing the urgent documents that came in daily. The large stack of papers that stood beside him was only a fraction of what had been sent to him at dawn today. After these explanations, His Majesty ordered the bride to continue with the plague document. She said aloud what she saw on the paper, and in her mind she was thinking that these documents did not fit the image of a great empire. The lower Erin River, where the plague began, is swarming with homeless and orphaned people who scavenge through garbage in search of food, and although slavery has been officially abolished, it still exists. People are still kidnapped from the islands and put up for auction. They are kept in terrible conditions, and few reach their destination. Most die in huge cages because of the crush, hunger, and disease, and those who survive are sold at auction. After reading the slave clause, Karl told Erica to stop and put the papers away, but she didn't want to give them up, causing the young man to have to take the documents almost by force. The emperor began to ponder aloud why the plague first affects the lower classes, and came to the conclusion that it was because they were dirty, comparing them to the garbage in the streets. The girl sat across from him, listening to all of His Majesty's thoughts, but then Erica's face began to change. It became more angry. The guy noticed this and smirked, put the book Plants of the Central Regions in front of his concubine, and made her read aloud until he told her to stop. A week later, the concubine was in her chambers, obviously waiting for something. A knock was heard at the door. A messenger from the emperor entered the bedroom with the words that His Majesty wished to see her. He noticed that the lady had prepared in advance and was already waiting for him. The man's name is Pyu, and he has been telling Erica for a week now that the emperor has been summoning her to him, and when he comes, he calls the girl His Majesty's poetess, or nightingale. He says this in jest since the bride started rewriting documents and reading them aloud. Such eunuch behavior is against the rules, but Pooh is the youngest and the easiest to get along with, and is up to date on all the latest news. Once again, when the lady visited the emperor's castle with her aide, he told her that Karl breeds eels and crocodiles, and sometimes gives convicts to feed these animals. Erica was angered by this fact, but the eunuch didn't show any sign of it, but only smiled and spoke of how His Majesty hated many things, such as having something stuck in his throat. The concubine recounted the incident of the fish bone at the meal, which made Pyu cringe, assuming that this butler should have been executed after such a mistake, and if not, This man should devote his entire life to serving for the emperor's benefit. Erica wondered how the subjects could truly revere such a cruel ruler, and the eunuch continued to praise his majesty, saying that without wars, the peasants could eat well because of the law that had real power. Also, an academy for commoners was organized, so people called their time the Golden Age. Guy invited Erica to come in, but she stopped when she saw several butlers mocking the boy. The bride rushed towards the men, yelling for them to stop, but Pooh stopped her, telling her not to interfere with the eunuchs, but the girl didn't listen to him. The concubine broke out of the butler's grip and ran to the assistants to stop them, and stood right in front of the boy, blocking him. One of the eunuchs grinned and replied that he was only teaching the rude butler a lesson, to which Erica said that flogging was not a lesson. The man tried to object, but suddenly the bride remembered Liz's words. The girl believed in herself and started talking about how she was the daughter of the Lord of the North End, who protects the empire, and now she is the bride of the emperor who rules it, so it is her duty to protect her subjects. Finishing her speech, the lady gave her hand to the boy and led him away, humiliating the other eunuchs by saying that sooner or later the young lady would regret her action. Erica took the boy to safety, asked if he was all right, and looked into his eyes full of pain. To the concubine, this child reminded the children of the slums. They were as thin as he was, but the expression on his face was nothing like them. Pyu approached them and called a boy named Hadin. The girl was surprised that the eunuch knew this boy. He approached him, wiped his face with a handkerchief, and said that he was the new eunuch. Hayden began to lick his wounds. Pyu tried to stop him from doing so. He asked him to thank the lady and return to his room. Erica stood aside, and after the elder eunuch's words, offered the boy to come with her, explaining that she needed a butler. The young man warned the girl that Hayden had not yet been taught anything, but she paid no attention to the words. Asked Rudy to take him to the healer. The eunuch thought Lady Kaur's action right, which he told her, and took the child away. After what happened, Pyu didn't utter a single word, and the bride kept pondering her actions. She didn't regret saving the boy, but there was one nuance. In the study, the concubine was reading another document when the emperor noticed the wrong expression on the girl's face. She started to ruminate on the fact that there were many bad people in the world, but cut her thought short by replying that she was only reading. There was a map in the book where Erica noticed a part of the empire that wasn't talked about and asked Karl about it. His Majesty said that there was no point in telling her about it, because she wouldn't understand anything anyway. The girl made a hurt look on her face, which immediately caught the guy's eye. Still, he decided to explain. It turned out to be the Belus, a mountain range that separates the western continent and Ar. Some say outlaws descend from this ridge. Erica was surprised by this fact, for she had always been told that bandits lived in the forests, but not in the mountains. Karl was glad that the girl was gradually learning and was not foolish at this point, continuing her story. The bandits that live in the forests are called forest devils, but they only rule within the Iron Forest, and near Belus are the Grey Wolves, surviving soldiers of defeated armies, scum mercenaries, thieves and murderers. Because of this, Lord Rovin is ordered to increase the number of troops. The young lady noted that it was not far from this place to Speartown, and the Emperor continued her thought by saying that these lands were as important as the North End. Erica continued to inquire, asking who held the lands north of Lord Rovin, to which she received the answer that there was nothing to defend in such distant lands, so they didn't need a feudal lord. The concubine was indignant, explaining her point of view by saying that even in the ice of the caves, there are people living whose homes could be attacked by criminals, and no one could help them. The emperor got angry and pounded his fist on the table, to which the bride calmly replied that she was just wondering what the ruler was going to do in such a situation. Karl continued to yell at her about how he had no need to protect every small village. The girl again objected that all these people were his subjects to take care of. The emperor's eyes filled with blood. He kicked the girl out of the office, accusing her of disrespect and ignorance. As soon as she left, her last phrases began to roll around in his head. Erica was sitting on the windowsill, busily writing, when Liz came to her with a plate of manzanella. The maid inquired what the mistress was so enthusiastically writing down. The joyful girl showed her the very book that Karl had been so diligently forcing her to read. After that quarrel, His Majesty did not seek out meetings with Erica. At first she was glad, but it quickly bored her. So she dug through the entire office looking for a new activity. The concubine was interested in how healers came up with new potions. She had been reading up on the subject. A maid came over to her and placed a blank sheet on the book. The mistress was pleased that she had found another way to learn how to write, and Liz replied that it was the easiest thing she could do to achieve her goal, but shortcuts were not something to be proud of. At the beginning of her life in the castle, the maid seemed closed and cold, but later she became affectionate. After this thought, the bride thought of her father. She wanted him to know that his daughter had learned to write well. The woman suggested she write a letter and send it through the Imperial Department of External Affairs, if the content of the letter was suitable. Erica was even more enthusiastic after such a suggestion and immediately started writing. But Liz was distracted when she heard some noises outside the door, deciding that Hayden had misbehaved again. Mistress decided to go along with the maid. In the hallway, the girls met Rudy, who warned that Hayden couldn't wear the uniform yet, due to the fact that he hadn't had surgery yet, and there had never been any cases of a non-graduated child joining the service. In the opinion of many, an uncircumcised eunuch of any age in service could be a problem, especially this boy, because he was half gypsy and they are quite difficult to raise. The boy was found playing in the kitchen. Rudy immediately began to swear at him not to do it again, but Erica stood up for the child. The older eunuch held the boy by his clothes, and as soon as he let go, Hayden immediately ran into the arms of his concubine. Rudy thought it was wrong that the bride was spoiling the future butler, and that he should not be pitied because he had been abandoned by his parents. When the boy heard this phrase, he shouted at the top of his voice that he should not be pitied, and almost hit the elder eunuch. Rudy shouted back at him, but the scuffle was stopped by Erica taking the experienced butler by the arm. He thought the mistress was too kind to raise such a child. The man snapped his fingers, and a bucket full of fish with sharp fins and a terrible odour was placed in front of him. The unknown man stood in front of a crowd of bound guys and ordered one of them to eat this bucket of fish, their number equal to the number of captives the guy was trying to free. He threatened that he would release as many prisoners as the young man could eat. With trembling hands, he began to carry out the man's order. The fish was raw, so to the smell was added a nasty taste. From dislike, the guy's eyes went tears. The unknown man began to taunt him, posing as a captive and pointing out that he couldn't even eat one. The man leaned on his sword, waiting, calling eating fish a simple matter, and the boy should learn to pay for the gravity of his choices with it. His Majesty kept his promise. The bound women were crying loudly, blaming the guy for their death. It turned out that they were pregnant, and after the birth of the children were going to name them after the dead knights and members of the royal family, nurturing hatred for the imperial family and the desire for revenge. The healer came to Karl and took under his arm to take the exhausted lad to the infirmary. His Majesty sat down on his knees and told his father that he had been wrong. Only after the deaths of these men could he live in peace. The emperor woke up from his nightmare, trying to catch his breath. He could smell blood again and the vile sensation of fish in his mouth. The eunuch who served in Karl's chambers was ill, so he was replaced by Pyu. He offered his Majesty water, but he refused, asking for something stronger. The boy walked out of the bedroom, exhaled, and was beginning to think about what to bring for a drink when a yawning man appeared in the hallway, suggesting that the young butler had once again failed to turn down night duty, later sending him off to run an errand as soon as possible. Pu thought the emperor should bring alcohol, but the experienced eunuch warned that it was a foolish idea, and his Majesty would not drink alone, and reminded him why the ruler needed concubines, suggesting someone from the northern palace. When his Majesty suffered from nightmares, all concubines who entered his chambers would die. This is known only to those who are in the harem for a long time, and to the concubines themselves, and the secret is guarded most carefully for their own safety. The concubines who are aware of what is going on are locked in their chambers for the night, and the choice falls on girls who are unaware of the circumstances. But there are also cases when the eunuchs harbour a grudge against one of the ladies. Rudy looked downcast and wondered if something had happened that night. Erica was going to a meeting with the emperor calmed him down by suggesting the eunuch go to bed. The butler did not agree, but decided to go with her. Pu Erica and Rudy were walking through the garden to the carriage in which they were to go to the Emperor's residence when they heard a rustling in the bushes. A few seconds later, something came out of there. The young men cried out in fear, and it was only Hayden who asked the mistress not to leave. The concubine looked at the child with kindness, asking why he was still not in bed, to which he looked at her with sad eyes, and guiltily replied that he had only noticed Pyu leaving, again asking Erica to stay. The mistress smiled back. She said she couldn't stay because it was the Emperor's order. Hearing this, Hadine put something in her pocket. The girl was surprised. The boy laughed. Rudy was afraid for his concubine, and Pugh began to hurry the young men, for they were already delayed. When the eunuchs, along with the mistress, arrived at the castle, there was some commotion that made the girl nervous. On the floor, she noticed a cloth with bloodstains. The men picked it up and carried it away. Erica's body was covered with trembling. The bride wanted to find out what happened. One of the guards apologized to the young lady for what had happened, wished her to be more careful, and left with everyone else. Rudy was starting to get nervous. An old eunuch with a wide smile on his face appeared in the corridor and warned that His Majesty was already expecting the girl at his place. Erica thought that he might be involved in what was going on, but didn't give any sign. The concubine would have been about to leave, but Rudy took her by the dress, stopped her, looked into her eyes and asked her to keep herself safe. Cascade smirked, assuring her that those words were unnecessary. It was just a meeting. No one was going to kill the young lady. The mistress walked along the corridor with the eunuch to the appointed place. The girl did not like the atmosphere of this trip at all. She had a premonition that something was wrong. Erica was given a tray with a glass of wine and told to enter the room. Tears were visible on her face. The door opened. The room was pitch black. Only the table with a candlestick was visible. It seemed to the bride that there was no one in the bedroom. As soon as she placed the tray on the table, a black shadow appeared. The concubine screamed in fear. The Emperor came out of the darkness, asking what she was doing in his chambers. His Majesty stood in his robe all wet, as if he had just finished taking a bath. It embarrassed the bride. She looked away. Erica replied that he had called her. The guy was surprised. The concubine wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, so assumed she had come by mistake, so she should leave. As soon as she took a step over the threshold, Karl came out behind her. The Emperor asked once more why she was leaving now that she had come, but she repeated that she had made a mistake, so intended to return to her room. Erica took another step towards the exit, but before she could leave, Karl grabbed her by her cloak and led her back into the room. The chambers were already filled with moonlight. The Emperor took the bottle of alcohol and filled another glass, inviting the girl to sit down. The bride hesitated for a long time, choosing between the chair that stood near the bed, which could anger Karl, and the bed where her fiancé sat. She suddenly remembered the gift from Hayden and slipped her hand into her pocket to see what he had put in it. It was something small and wet. The girl sighed and sat down next to His Majesty because he was starting to get turned on. Erica watched as the groom filled another glass with alcohol. She sniffed and smelled blood in addition to the foul odour of alcohol. Karl's gaze began to soften, but the sense of danger did not diminish. Erica saw the sword that lay not far from them. The bride asked why there was a smell of blood in the room. The Emperor asked her to sit down, which she did, leaving a distance between them. His Majesty thought that the concubine was mocking him. He grabbed her hand and pulled her closer to him. But he did not calculate the force, which caused her to hit his chest. Karl was starting to get angry. His mind was spinning about how to properly understand women. He laid back on the bed. The girl's hand continued to rest on his chest. The Emperor wondered if she was going to push him away, if he pressed her against him, and if she would object. Erica remembered Aunt Julia's words about comparing her to a stray cat who could hold herself more nobly than she could. The Emperor was holding his forehead. Alcohol had hit his head. It was the first time the bride had seen her groom in such a state, so she asked why he drank so much. His Majesty replied that it was all because of sleep. The boy stood in the bright space, pondering why death is so terrible. People don't change. Mercy will turn to blood. If you don't want to get stabbed in the back, you have to kill your enemy. Words that Karl said to himself in the distant past. To think it's okay to have weaknesses is the most dangerous. There is no good and evil. There is only action and result. This is the battlefield. Trust your thoughts to instincts and your body to insanity until the war is over. The smell of alcohol was replaced by the smell of dead fish, blood running all over his body for a dark longing to find an outlet. The hero thought he was really going crazy. Erika noticed the strange state of the emperor, decided to ask how he was feeling. The guy didn't answer anything, but only took the concubine by the hand and fell on the bed. The lady was confused, tried to ask what he was doing, but again got no answer, deciding that the emperor had not yet come to his senses after drinking. The concubine had tears visible on her cheeks. The boy gently took her face and ran his hand through her hair, taking a long golden lock. Karl sniffed the hair. Its scent reminded him of a flower the girl had plucked from the flower bed for him, then took the strand in his mouth, began to chew it. Some strands that dangled over Erika's face tickled her, which made her laugh and made His Majesty angry, but she couldn't control herself in such a situation. The emperor looked at the girl. She reminded him of a porcelain doll, where every movement must be careful. Otherwise, there is a risk of breaking her. Karl rose above the concubine. She sat down. Then, his gaze was attracted to her collarbones. He, without a second thought, grasped her with his teeth. Erika screamed in pain, trying to push him away. The guy's eyes were still full of madness. The bride sat on the bed, rubbing the bitten spot. The emperor wanted to say something, but heard a strange sound. His Majesty called one of the eunuchs to fetch a candlestick, and then went back to the bottle, coming to his senses. The emperor glanced at Erika, who sat motionless on the bed, frogs croaking in the background, every sound, every silhouette vaguely irritating him. His Majesty told the girl to stand up so as not to disturb the eunuchs looking for the frog, and gave her a hand. The concubine accepted the help, but Karl kept thinking he wanted to bite her, but didn't want to add any more sounds. Cascade entered the room with a candle in his hand, but seeing the emperor and his fiancée holding hands, he became worried. His Majesty ordered without further words and questions to find the frog. A commotion began. Every corner was cleaned, and the green rascal was almost caught. Karl suddenly realized that next to Erika he felt like a predatory beast rather than a human being. But he didn't understand what was causing the feeling. The mistress reflected on her life. She knew the place where she lived, but she was just a contract signed for the well-being of the North. The engagement was a seal on the document. Erika considered herself just a weed that failed to bloom because of a cruel tyrant. She often wondered if they could get along together, but she was wrong. The emperor started complaining about the frogs. The bride looked angrily at the groom and snatched her hand out of his palm. Karl was just as angry at her behavior, so he warned the concubine that she should not touch him unless she wanted to be thrown off the balcony. The mistress thought she expected nothing from the guy, but now she realized she wanted some affection from him. But since he did the same thing to all his concubines, why should she be the exception? Something unknown seemed to shatter in the girl's chest. She regretted waiting for understanding from this man. Sadness constantly sat somewhere close to her heart, and every time something sad happened, it pounced from within to hurt. The emperor didn't care. He was only intimidating Erika. The mistress was determined she didn't want to see him again. It was getting dark outside. The locals had lit the lights in their houses. The concubine looked into the distance, and her eyes lit up from so many lights. The bride was comforted by the realization that there were people in the capital besides her surroundings and lights in the houses, she cried. Karl looked at the girl nearby, and noticing her crying again in thought, rebuked her for it. He didn't understand what his fault was. After all, he hadn't done anything wrong. But he saw that they were tears of fear. The emperor continued his thought. The guy thought he wasn't doing anything wrong, and the girls were looking forward to some intimacy with him. But she was his lawful bride. A strange feeling sat inside, like a clammy wet hand stroking the back of her neck. After a long silence, Karl allowed the girl to leave. Yes, as quickly as possible. Erika apologized, again blaming it on the emperor's whims. Rudy was watching, standing at the corner of the wall. As soon as she approached him, the eunuch took her hand and motioned for her to return. Whether it was the tears flowing from his eyes or the small lights in the distance, his soul was no longer aching, as if everything that had happened before had become a brief illusion. Karl began to cry too. Erika thought he was in pain too. The sun was shining brightly outside, warming her with its rays. Erica was picking flowers from an orange tree to make potpourri. In fact, she had chosen such an easy job to relieve her head and rest from her intrusive thoughts. But the most important reason wouldn't let go. The Emperor. Liz reminded her that His Majesty wasn't going to kill her, but she knew that, as well as the fact that after the marriage they would inevitably get closer. But how strong that closeness would be was impossible to predict. Mistress hadn't had this kind of experience up to this point, because she had never interacted with someone close enough, and she couldn't get used to her situation and what kind of person she was getting. Liz was worried about the wound on her concubine's neck, but the girl herself didn't care. She wondered what the maid's reaction would be if she knew how much pain just saying that she was just the Emperor's bride and one of the concubines in the future would provide. Erica decided for herself that she needed to accept her partner at all costs and not forget what his nature was. The mistress began to think of everyone around her. Aunt Julia, the obnoxious lady who was her own aunt, and Darcy, the ill-mannered child, the young lady's older sister. When the rose-coloured glasses shattered, the bride realised her fiancé was a ruthless tyrant. But why did he read so much pain in his face on their last meeting? The concubine couldn't understand why. When Carl called out to her, she began to freak out. As soon as she pictured the image in her head, she began to drive similar thoughts away from her. Liz noticed Mistress's strange movements and asked what was wrong. The girl replied that she remembered a shameful thing, calming the maid down. One of Erica's goals was to become like her assistant, to be just as reserved and well-mannered. After this conversation, the maid handed the mistress the invitation, to which she replied that the woman should send a refusal as they usually did. But this time it would not do so, for the letter came from the southern palace itself, from Mistress Obel Mavrinth herself. There are 3 titles in the harem: Hwanbi, the Emperor's mother and mistress of the harem; Gwibi, who controls the harem; and Favourite, the girl favoured by the Emperor, though all the titles were a formality. But the concubines are willing to hurt each other just to get one of them. There have been so many rumours about it, but now there are no Hwanbi or Gwibi in the harem. So their duties are performed by the mistress of the Western Palace, Claudel Thubo, and the mistress of the Eastern Palace, Arabella Asante. As a bride, Erica had no title, due to which she kept afloat only at the expense of her family's status. But there was not much of it either. Sometimes the girl was saddened by her position, but she kept silent, realizing that she would soon rise to the status of a Gwibi. But the other concubines did not like it. Why they had to probe the ground, refusing all invitations except for the southern palace. This place is inhabited by ladies of imperial blood and rather not part of the harem, but an independent territory, because the power is above the aristocracy, so the emperor cannot do as he pleases. Liz's face softened. She didn't understand why ladies interfered in harem affairs. Erica wanted to ask why, but held back, for the maid knew the state the girl was in. This feeling is like a severe migraine. No medication helps. The pain comes and goes. Mistress often thought about the cause of suffering, but could not find it. Why did Mother die? Is it the scar that still hurts? What made Darcy and Julia cruel to their relative? How come they are now engaged to the Emperor? Questions that constantly bothered the heroine. But among them was one of the most important. Why Erica cannot be free? And the answer in no way came. So only waiting for the moments when the girl could forget about her pain remains. The Lakin family was notable for its short reign. The youngest twin brother Obel died at a young age. His last words were a request to plant trees that would stand still even after 1,000 years. The old lady's eunuch wished her well, pouring her tea, to which she responded in kind. At this time Lady Kaur arrived. The lady immediately thought of where they would go. This place was Aviaria. The old lady hoped the girl would like it. Mrs. Mavrinth took her assistant under her arm and walked towards Erica. The woman noted that Gray had touched her old friend's hair, but his hands remained the same. It amazed her that he hadn't changed in all the years. The bride decided to show everything she had learned during her time in the fortress, and with all her femininity, greeted the mistress of the palace. Obel was also happy to see the young lady. They talked about the beautiful trees that had been brought from the old lady's homeland. She noticed Rudy touching his mistress, for which she received a reprimand from the old lady. The eunuch bowed silently to apologize. Even after the butler's words, she continued to grumble at the young lad, before turning the topic to her friend, Lakiris. In his youth, the man was very handsome, which caused rumours about Mrs. Mavrinth and Lakiris, how much suffering the lady had to endure. She advised Erica that she should gain weight in the eyes of society or learn to shut the rats behind her back to avoid the same treatment in the future. The old lady suggested that they go to see the charming garden, and Lakiris offered to socialise with Rudy and treat him to a piece of cake, after which the eunuchs departed, leaving the women alone. Erica walked through the garden with a smile on her face. This could not but please the mistress of the palace, because recently the young lady walked with an unhappy expression on her face, the reason for which interested the old lady. The girl replied that she was very glad to live in the fortress, for she had admired the place all her life, but Lady Murrint immediately suspected her of lying, warning her that with her she could be frank about anything that troubled her. In return, the old lady would tell her about her youth. Obel Mavrinth began. With his brother they were on excellent terms, but his father often thought that behind the back of his son, the future ruler of Lancia, was a cold and calculating older sister, because of which he sent the girl away from home. In Kalia, the lady's husband, Klein, had 6 mistresses and even more courtesans. For him, his wife was on the same level with them. Erica asked about a few details of the story, to which the lady replied that to begin with, they would go to one place that the girl was sure to like. The women went into a greenhouse where bright, beautiful birds flew, which was the old lady's hobby, after which she offered the young concubine a little look around. One of the eunuchs who served in the place picked up a nest full of bird eggs to show it to the bride. Her smile shone even brighter at this sight. As she approached the table where Lady Mavrinth was resting, she noticed a large bird and came closer. Obel asked about Aviaria and asked the bird, named Balatro, to say hello to her guest. The parrot kindly said hello and offered the girl tea, then added a cube of refined sugar to the mug, which surprised Erica, and the owner told her that these birds were brought from her homeland, and Balatro was born on one of the islands of Roach, on Whoopi. This place was like the Garden of Eden. The girls started talking about their homeland. Erica said that of course she loved her homeland, but she didn't miss home now. Obel understood her perfectly, for she had felt the same way when her father, Velius Larkin, had exiled her to Kalia. Klein, Mrs. Mavrinth's husband, treated her like an annoying guest, and his mistresses plotted against her, after which the lady stopped her story with this phrase: "Men cheat too much, and girls shed a lot of blood over it, and that's the way it's always been. Men cheat too much and girls bleed too much, and that's the way it's always been." The bride became nervous after what was said, clutched her dress in her hands and asked again, looking directly into the eyes of her interlocutor, which told her that the girl was waiting for the same fate as her. The old woman took pity on the young lady, asking if she had already seen her fiancé, and asked God to show more mercy to Erica than had been shown to her, then began to ask about Karl. Rudy thought that the concubine had a good heart, but no one knows what's in her heart, and getting an invitation from the imperial family is not a bad prospect, but... He couldn't finish his thought because he noticed Mr. Lakiris, who was moving away from them with a quick step, although he was quite old. The eunuch started to call out to the man, but he ignored him, so the guy decided to follow him all the way, asking where he was going and calling him by name. Lakiris entered a tall tower with no stairs, windows or doors. Rudy knew at once that it was the Tower of the Dead, and followed him again. In ancient times, wizards cast spells to prevent evil spirits from escaping from the basements in temples, where saints and martyrs were honoured and buried. This 6-story tower was a place where people could stay before going to the spirit world. But at the same time, it was also a place of confinement. Rudy felt that Obel Mavrinth had not just called the girl for tea, and continued to follow Lakiris. He caught sight of the man in a dimly lit room. After examining it, he passed on. But when a dark figure stood before him, he cried out in fear. Lakiris turned around upon hearing the cry and asked the eunuch why he was here. Lakiris sat down on his knees and began to pray at the grave opposite him. Rudy noticed that there was no name on the headstone. But looking further, he saw that in this gloomy room full of graves, there was not a single name. The old lady was holding a cup of tea in her hands. They were shaking. Noticing this, the maid suggested the lady rest. The lady agreed, thanking Erica for a good meeting. The bride showered the mistress of the castle with many kind words and wishes. promised her to come back here again. But the thought that she could not fully trust Lady Morant. But there was no malice in her words, though she was sharp and straightforward. At last the girl cooled to the name of Carl Lakin. The old woman promised to give Erica a pair of canaries, and showed Balatro's skills. The bride got ready to leave, and Obel Marant offered her to come to the castle at any time, after which she apologized that she would not be able to see her guest off because of her poor condition. Mistress asked Hannah's maid where Rudy was now. He was in the backyard, and if the lady wanted to see him, she could go through the rosary. One of the helpers called out to the old lady, saying that a bird named Knox didn't want to mate. The woman had the thought that he might be sick, but he was perfectly healthy. He just didn't like any of his mates. He only liked Lana. The mistress ordered a messenger to be sent to the poultry farmer to buy up all the black parrots he had, for the green ones were of no use. Obel turned to Balatro, promising him that she would see to it that even after 1,000 years, his descendants would fly in the skies with wings as black as night. Erica went out into the garden with a smile on her face after the meeting, for she had been afraid of the old lady, but noted that she was kind and a good storyteller, and now the girl wanted to learn how to put her thoughts like Lady Mavrinth. The concubine kept wandering around the garden, but could not find a way out, but she noticed a ladder, deciding that if she climbed higher, she could find the right way. The girl climbed up the stepladder to climb the fence and into the rosary, but she couldn't hold on and fell right into the unknown girl's arms. Looking up, she noticed the young lady. She moved closer to her. Erica said she wouldn't tell anyone she saw her in the dress. She laughed. The unknown examined her dress, deciding it was too crumpled, but after asking how the concubine was feeling, she said she was fine, but she felt like there was some clouding in her head. The girl asked who she was. Erica introduced herself, but in her head she was ashamed of herself, for she was still a long way from Lady Morant. Her interlocutor pointed her finger at the wall, asking why the bride had climbed up there, to which the mistress replied guiltily that she only wanted to find the way. This amused the young lady. She apologized, explaining her chuckle by explaining her first time seeing such a lady, and introduced herself as Roelle Lakin, at which time a startled Rudy ran up to the girls. Erica began to talk about how she had met a girl with a face just like His Majesty's. The eunuch in turn talked about the oddities of Mr. Lakiris. The pair agreed that all the people in the southern palace were rather strange individuals. Carl sat in his office trying to work, but he was hampered by constant thoughts of Eric, which made him angry, his gaze often clinging to the chair she was sitting in. The Emperor had always thought of her as a calm, quiet girl. The image of her reading in the chair across the hall had lodged itself tightly in his mind. But the hate-filled gaze that night never left his mind. The young man scattered all the papers he had in his hands out of anger. The thought of what he had done wrong kept haunting him. The guy dismissed it, and thought about what would be the proof that Erica was his property, if not the fact that she was his fiancée and concubine. Pooh was cleaning up nearby when Carl called him over to him, asking his name and clarifying that he was the one in charge of the northern palace. This surprised the eunuch, for the Emperor only spoke to Cascade. His Majesty began to ask what Erica was doing. The butler suggested he go and find out Lady Cor's schedule. The young man agreed, but asked him not to say he had sent him on this task. When Pugh left, the Emperor began to calm himself, thinking that the bride was still crazy about him, and was writing him a letter how much she missed him. Erica, with a smile on her face, showed the sheet that read Boney and Rico, the names of the 2 birds that Obel Mavrinth had given her, and Hayden stood by the cage, examining the 2 canaries that were white and yellow in colour. Liz reassured the eunuch by saying that Hayden was a clever boy, and that he should be taught a few things, and that he would be able to take care of the birds. Rudy, too, should try to work on his duties to gain Lady Mavrinth's favour and improve relations with Erica. In turn, the mistress should take the first steps to get closer to Obel, to get her on her side. The concubine decided that she should send Lady Mavrinth a return gift and make a potpourri, then asked Liz's advice as to which package she should choose. Rudy thought about how Erica had changed after living in the northern palace, whereas before she used to walk around sad all the time. Now she was constantly smiling. PYU, all out of breath, returned to the Emperor's study, telling him that the bride had gone away, so she was not in the palace. But His Majesty was not pleased, but only angry because at the time when he had called her to him, she had refused and lounged in bed. And now she had gone somewhere. The girl was well. She was healthy, well-fed, and having fun. Lady Moran thanked Erica for the gift and offered to see her treasure chest, where there were children's drawings, letters, and an old whip. The old woman took it in her hands and asked her concubine if she had ever ridden a horse, because girls also need to know how to sit on a horse. The bride replied that she hadn't had the chance before, because in the North End, horses are sacred animals and can only be ridden by rangers. Obel recalled that when her husband died, she commanded knights on horseback as regent. Erica was surprised, asked if they would be riding now, to which she received an affirmative answer, and the old woman sent Rudy to prepare a saddle with the other eunuchs. The ladies went into the stable, where there were already trained horses, so they were few in number, and showed a white young horse with a light mane whose name was Sola. Mistress came closer to her to pet her. The animal liked the girl, so Lady Mavrinth offered to saddle her. Erica sat on the horse. She began to tell her how to control it correctly. She got it right the first time, and the concubine felt as if she had become a big animal herself. Having descended from the horse, the bride thanked the mistress of the palace for such an opportunity, said that she was scared at the beginning, but as soon as everything began to work out, the fear instantly evaporated and asked to ride again. Erica grabbed on the fly all the advice. Everyone was surprised that she saddled a horse for the first time, while the girl was riding someone called her. The bride rubbed her eyes, seeing dandelions in Sola's mane, brushed them off and continued to practice riding. The emperor was watching the concubine from afar. Erica spotted him and galloped away. The attendant offered to bring her, but Karl refused. Lakiris showed Rudy the barrels of water and ordered him to carry them all. The eunuch didn't like it. He persuaded him that he should be allowed to bring someone to help him, because he couldn't do it alone. The man stood his ground and refused to let him do it. The old man explained that other people were forbidden to enter here, but he realized at once that Erica already knew about this place. Roel was reading a book when the concubine returned and wanted to talk to her about something, because the girl was already bored with literature. To avoid meeting the emperor, the bride immediately rushed over to say goodbye to Lady Mavrinth. Erica saw what kind of book Roel was reading. It wrote about the destruction of the Tesla kingdom after the invasion of 3 nations. The topic of war upset the girl because it makes people unhappy, and whether it affects the aristocrat's family or not, the tears start to come on their own. It was the first time Roel saw a sad person, because until she was 3 years old, she lived with her mother in Torquay Fortress. They were not welcome there at all, because of which later she was locked up in an old fortress on Roach Island, where there were only stones, maids who did not speak, and a cruel man that came to visit the girl. And as soon as the war ended, her grandmother moved to this place to support the young emperor and took the lady to herself. Erica thought about how similar they were in their loneliness. The girl continued her story, adding that her grandmother was quite a strange person, but her older brother was no better. Even if something bad happened to her, it didn't matter, because good things came to her sooner or later, like meeting a concubine. Rudy finished his work and sat down on the floor from exhaustion. Lakiris put a bucket of water next to the guy to make the swelling go down from his hands. The man noticed that the eunuch was sitting on the lid of the coffin, but it didn't embarrass the guy at all. After all, the dead didn't care. Lakiris said that there was no one in the coffin itself, but that it had a master, a phrase that startled Rudy, and he asked about the others, the eunuch thinking that it was all for the fallen of the war, since the tomb was so carefully cared for. The man rejected this hypothesis, explaining that he was moved not by a feeling of love, but sincerity. So he asked for their forgiveness. Lakiris began to threaten the guy that if his secret is revealed, his loved ones will face a terrible death. Karl warned Obel that he wanted to take some horses, but the lady wasn't satisfied with that, for he didn't even bother about her well-being. The emperor apologized. He believed that Lady Mavrinth was inventing all sorts of schemes while sitting in the palace, and like a spider's web, weaving a vast tapestry that would take centuries to create. The old lady immediately realized that His Majesty was not interested in Sola, but in her rider. The guy did not give any sign. The lady continued her thought. She thought that Erica was a nice girl, but hard to approach, and praised the girl's gift. The emperor hurriedly withdrew, and Obel warned that he should be changed in his behavior. His Majesty asked the old woman to stop moralizing. After all, in his opinion they are unlikely to change anything, because the vows have already been said and she belongs to him. Obel felt sorry for the guy, because the engagement could be broken at any moment. Erica was writing a telegram to her father, remembering all the good times of her life at the North Palace, had stayed up late, from which she was very tired, but had still to prepare for her meeting with Mrs. Pierce. Mrs. Verith Pierce was born into a noble family in the capital, and was for a long time court lady to Mrs. Maverinth, though she is now retired, but occasionally visits the Southern Palace, for the sake of her chief duty of bookkeeping. Obel Maverinth had asked her to teach her concubine. This pleased even Liz, who was wary of her mistress. The maid entered, warning her that it was time for class. The bride was pleased at Lady Maverinth's kindness. She considered herself lucky, as she was able to meet a friend of her own age. Erica sat in the Lakin family's ledger vault, which contained records of all the family's income and expenditures. Mistress Pierce helped the girl correct her mistakes, advised her to take her time, and stepped away for a while. The concubine was determined to try her best to do her best, but after a couple of minutes of work, fell asleep right on the table. Carl went into the vault to see if the lady was there now, finding her asleep on the documents. He sat down beside her, picking up one of the sheets from the table. The Emperor wondered how he had guessed that this mop of golden hair was Erica, but it came to him that her wonderful scent of fragrant oil and flowers was to blame. His Majesty remembered her gift for Lady Maverinth and accidentally pulled the girl's hair, causing her to wake up. The bride looked sleepy. Her appearance amused the young man. She didn't understand why he was here now. Erica tried to fix her hair in a rush, but Carl told her to stop. He reached up to her face to remove strands of the concubine's hair himself. The Emperor asked if her bite hurt. She said she felt almost nothing, but the groom didn't think so and thought the girl was lying. Erica was frustrated by his attitude towards her. The guy was cruel one moment, and the next meeting he showed concern. Which one was the real Carl was unclear. The bride admitted that she was in a bit of pain, but there was no need to worry about it, because the concubine and her pain were of no importance to His Majesty. After these words, the girl got ready to leave. The Emperor was surprised. He didn't understand how he should act, but here he decided to do something he had never done before. Apologize, to comfort his heart. Carl apologized for all the pain he had caused his fiancée, promising that it wouldn't happen again, dismissing her idea that he didn't care about her. Erica was surprised at what she said, and promised that she would do everything in her power to make the bridegroom to her heart, which amazed the guy. The Emperor asked her not to say anything else, because he thought that all the words she said were a complete nonsense, not forgetting to reproach her for sleeping in the vault. The concubine explained that she was studying accounting. His Majesty continued to sarcasm in response. The girl apologized and was about to leave, but Carl stopped her, forbidding her to leave without his permission, and left the room himself. The Emperor almost walked towards the exit, but suddenly turned to Erica to ask her to send that closet thing. The bride clarified if he was talking about the sachet, to which the groom replied that he didn't know what the thing was called, but since she had earned the favour of Mistress Morin, he should check it out personally. Erica was surprised at such an order, but since His Majesty said so, she had to do it and started to work. Rudy wanted to help, so he took out some blue flowers, saying that they would be very appropriate, because in the language of flowers had the meaning of never forget me. The concubine was not happy about it, and asked the eunuch to stop fooling around. Erica noticed something was wrong with the guy's hand, urged him to show her the wound. Rudy said he couldn't put on gloves because he couldn't, and rubbed the blister. The concubine noticed the eunuch acting strangely after each visit, thinking it might be because of Mr. Lakiris, but the lad refuted the thought. The young man asked not to worry about him, as he was just spending time with this old man, and working hard trying to please him in everything. That's where the calluses came from. A tear came to his eyes. The bride sighed, said that he didn't need to tell her everything, but if the guy doubted whether to talk about something, it was better to tell her. Rudy smiled, promised to do exactly that from now on. He remembered the man's phrase, "If you reveal my secret, all your loved ones will die a horrible death," which he certainly did not doubt. Cascade met Rudy at the palace where the Emperor lives, asking what the box in his hands was, to which he received the reply that it was a gift for His Majesty from the Northern Palace. The eunuch immediately condemned the worthless gift, To this, the lad replied that Carl had asked for it himself. Cascade smiled and carried the box away. Rudy headed back to the Northern Palace with a strange feeling inside. In the eunuch's heart, there was only Louisa. From the day he met her until the day he died, nothing would change. He remembered well that hot day. Rudy was sitting on the ground, all beaten up, when a red-haired girl came up to him to ask who did it, to which she received the answer that it was the boy's master. Louise asked not to let him do that again, but he couldn't agree because he belongs to his master. The girl suggested Rudy to run away like she did. Louise's mother wanted to sell the girl, so she had to kill her so she could never give birth to another bastard again. The eunuch didn't believe a word she said. He began to worry about her. Where she will sleep at night, where she plans to go and what to do next. Louise offered Rudy to run away together, and she will become his new mistress. And from that moment, there was no one in the guy's life more dear than this girl. But when Cascade humiliates Erica, the eunuch also begins to get angry. The young man didn't understand why that was. After all, Erica was just one of his hosts. None of them could ever like Rudy. But it was the insults towards Erica that made him feel lousy. The fellow called out to the eunuch, who introduced himself as Mrs. Claudel's servant. He seized Rudy by the arm and dragged him somewhere. The unknown man led him into a dark corridor where he began to ask him where he was coming from, for he had been seen going to the main palace with a box in his hands. But the fellow returned without it. The boy did not understand why he had to answer these questions. The servant repeated that he was Mrs. Claudel's eunuch. Rudy refused to talk about it, which made the young man angry. He began to shout at him. The eunuch could not stand it, hit his interlocutor, and ran away from there. The guy thought he was too weak for a man of Claudel's retinue, or there was a chance he could be a spy. Rudy wandered down the corridor, found an exit, and decided to head back to the Northern Palace. When the eunuch returned, it was already night. Everyone was asleep. Liz met him with a candle in her hands, which frightened the guy. The maid asked him to check Erica's room, because yesterday she had forgotten to put out the candles before going to bed. Rudy went into the ladies' chambers when she was sleeping like a baby and had not extinguished the candle today either. Beside her lay a letter for Bengenbeck Cora, in which the bride spoke of her friends. Roelle, who turned out to be her first age friend. She was beautiful and always told witty jokes. Liz strictly taught the girl to choose the right paths. She was kind and affectionate, just like Melinda. Rudy had always taken care of her and was always there for her. Time with him passing imperceptibly. They had all become a mainstay for the concubine. The eunuch smiled at that, not knowing what to make of it. Erica attended a ballroom dancing lesson in the house of Mrs. Moran. The old lady thought that she dances quite well, and with such skills will not be embarrassed. Repeating after Liz, the girl fell to the floor without end. But better here than at the ball. The mistress of the Southern Palace asked how many times she had been to the events. To this, the bride replied that she had never attended them. The dance instructor embraced her concubine, assumed Lady Cor had not been in the capital for a long time, and was trying to adjust to life where she had no ties. Obel Maverinth was relieved that the rainy season wasn't over yet, and Erica had time to show herself in society. Otherwise it would be hard for her to blend into the aristocracy later on, and the act would be perceived as rude. A woman offered to attend a reception at the Ria Festival, asking the musician to play a few songs that would be at the very beginning of the dance. The old lady had asked her to bring her seamstress, so her concubine could get a couple dresses for the occasion. Erica was grateful for such help, but couldn't help but worry. She needed to get over it. Rudy continued to carry barrels of water. Lakiris watched him. At one point, he revealed that the guy who met the eunuch in the main palace was named Flynn. He was just a puppet you can't even call a spy. He was discovered because it's connected to the Western Palace and rats see everything. He asked the old man for help, but he replied that it was the calm before the storm, and he should make sure that nothing happened to Erica, but not to abandon the training. They should go very quietly, and if they had to run, they should not make a sound, because the next time he met Flynn, he might have a knife in his hands. Upon returning to the Northern Palace, the concubine shared with Liz that she would be attending the festival. No need to worry about the dress, which pleased the maid, as there was no seamstress in the capital who could take orders now, but the girl should learn the entire guest list. Rudy talked about the last festival, where the main theme was green waves. People were dressed in all shades of emerald. Benches were decorated to match their outfits, and even baked green bread. Rumour had it that moss was added to the dough. Liz asked the guy to stop, and Erica said, "Happy is the one who is able to have fun and laugh," and she was happy that people in the capital know how to do that. The maid took the concubine's hands and said that the girl would be happy too. She thanked her. On the day of the gala, Erica was showered with lots of compliments from her assistants. As she tried on her dress, she thanked them and cried with excitement. Liz reassured the bride, but it didn't make her feel any better, so the heroine asked the maid to go along with her. The woman sighed and agreed. The hall for the festival was very beautiful. The guests dressed in beautiful outfits. The concubine was very anxious. Her hands were sweating. Obel cheered her up. One of the aides announced the arrival of Lady Mavrinth and Lady Core. The women approached Lady Grimple of Shannon to say hello. She immediately remembered that Erica was His Majesty's famous bride and began to inquire about her life in the capital. The concubine was excited by the question, wanted to tell in all details, but the old woman took her hand to restrain the ardour of the girl, after which the bride calmly, with all manners, told everything. By the end of her story, a smiling Erica was already surrounded by the nobility, Liz, along with Rudy, watching on, delighted with her mistress's progress. One of the aristocrats invited the girl to a tea party. She agreed to attend. At that moment, Rudy announced the arrival of the emperor and the beginning of the celebration. It was the first time the concubine had seen His Majesty so cordial. The aristocrats were seated at the table. The bride immediately knew it was Karl's harem. Erica recognized from the crowd of girls Claudel, who looked similar to the empress, though she sat among the concubines. There were two ladies whispering behind them. They were talking about the poor fortune of the Tubalt family and the jewels on Claudel's face. The girl glanced at Erica. She smiled at her, but the red-haired lady turned away from her. The bride turned around and began to survey the guests. Among them, the concubine noticed Lebra of Rubital and Arabella Asante, noting that the girls were very beautiful. Erica compared Claudel to a blooming rose and Arabella to a delicate lily. She was like the very ideal of the Gweeby she had imagined while she was learning etiquette. Arabella noticed her fiancé's gaze and looked back at her, and then looked away. She looked at her as if they already knew each other, but the girls had never met. There was a commotion at the table. The concubine thought that some special dish was being brought, but what was on the plate surprised her. A crocodile was placed on the table. The heroine asked to take it away. She was extremely surprised how the others could eat such a thing. Besides such a delicacy, there were other strange dishes on the table. Erica thought it was bad taste. In the end, she ate almost nothing. Lady Mavrinth was enjoying the evening. Claudel and her henchwomen were happy about it, and Lady Grimple was worried about her friend's condition. Obel asked the musicians to keep playing, and the servants to pour her drinks. When one of them approached the old lady, the concubine stopped her. The bride proposed to the mistress of the Southern Palace to go to the lounge, asking Lady Tubalt if she would agree to go with her, to which she received consent. Claudel of Jez considered it a great honour to meet the future Gibi and introduced herself. Erica paid a few compliments to the girl and greeted her in return. The concubine introduced the girls behind her back, the inhabitants of the palace, and wanted to tell more about them. But Lady Mavrinth was clearly unhappy with Tubalt's presence, so she left, considering it a disregard for etiquette. The old lady took another sip of alcohol and began to talk about how great bloodlines create great descendants, while promiscuous relationships, on the contrary, produce promiscuous people. She considered them as bastards. These girls know that they can't mess with the purity of blood, but want to do it for personal gain. After these words, Lady Grimple once again suggested her friend to go rest. Erica thought, who decides whether a person's blood is pure or dirty? And these girls are not to blame for the fact that there are too many concubines in the harem. She remembered about Roel, deciding that the old woman would look for a worthy husband for her too. The bride asked if her friend was coming today, but she didn't like visiting such places, so she wouldn't come. Lady Mavrinth asked about their time together. Erica happily told her that the girl was very well-mannered, and there was much to learn from her. The old lady was indignant. Obel asked if the concubine had been invited to the first dance. The heroine replied that she had received invitations, but had politely declined them all. the mistress of the southern palace, suggested that the bride thought the emperor would dance. The girl wondered indeed why she thought so. The guests were dancing. Lady Maverinth was dissatisfied with something. Wren Carson, whom no one expected to see in this place, approached the women. The guy asked Erica to dance, to which she again refused the young man. Claudel nearby danced with a young man and began to look for a bride. Her partner began to ask about the girl. He decided that the concubine, a rival of Lady Thubault to this red-haired woman, snidely replied that he considers her no more than a protruding thread on a silk scarf. Claudel noticed the commander next to Erica. She thought he was about to receive a rejection from Lady Cor. Wren Carson was the eldest son of Wayne Carson, Commander-in-Chief of the Knighthood of the Golden Lion. He was considered one of the best knights in the Empire, and it was a surprise to see him here. Lady Thubault was angry. One of the servants came up to her and offered to taste the goose. But the girl could not control her emotions, so she threw the dish with meat right on the floor. The guy apologized for the oversight, on which he received a slap. Everyone was surprised. Celine warned her mistress that a new dress had been prepared for her, to which she refused to put it on because she was about to leave. The maid offered to see her off, but Claudel told her to stay behind to find out what the maidens of the Eastern Palace were chatting about and what Erica was up to. Lady Maverinth admitted that she had never had the thought of quitting drinking, but after her godfather's actions, she had thought about it. The bride sat nearby, wondering if she could listen to this conversation, and if it would be too personal. The girl noticed a blow mark on the guy's cheek and asked Rudy to bring an ice pack. The eunuch thanked the lady for her kindness, after which Erica introduced herself. The young man was very happy to meet her. He wanted to greet her properly, but he couldn't kiss the lady's hand because they both smelled of food. The concubine's joke made his interlocutor laugh. As the godfather was drunk, he behaved a little inappropriately. Lady Maverinth was about to leave and asked Ben to escort her. Erica was about to leave too, but the Emperor stopped her. Before that, Wren had reported to Carl that she refused to dance with him. The groom had said it was all hopeless. The knight didn't understand His Majesty's reaction. They had known each other for almost 10 years. They considered each other friends first and foremost, and then already master and subordinate. So, the guy saw all too well what was in his heart. Some of the knights felt that if they really wanted her to dance and have a good time, they would send Adil to her, who had good manners, was popular with the noble ladies, and was like a blooming rose among all the gloomy men in the order. The Emperor gave the order after the event to prepare weapons and assemble on the Platz. Wren assumed Erica had not agreed, even if Adil had been sent to her. He thought it was His Majesty that the girl was waiting for. The knight bowed and stepped back. One of the order members praised the commander for getting away with it so easily. The others began to compare themselves to Wren. They are knights in direct subordination to the Emperor, considered the best in the entire empire, but for some reason became like a flock of noisy sparrows when not in public. The commander once again reminded the gathering after the event to stop the galloping. The rest of the guys began to banter about it amongst themselves. The Emperor extended his hand to Erica, offering to dance with him together. The girl was surprised at such an invitation, warning that she was not a good dancer, and offered her hand in return. The bride repeated the steps of the dance in her head. Carl whispered to her that she should not hurry, which made her angry. The concubine stepped on the groom's foot. His Majesty was surprised and pulled Erica to himself. Behind the backs of the couple there was a condemning whisper. The girl was embarrassed. Carl asked for his hand again. The concubine apologized and ran out of the hall in tears for such an oversight. The heroine went out on the balcony to get some fresh air and was disturbed by the Emperor reminding her of her words about his orders, which she is obliged to follow. Lady Cor wanted to object, but did not finish her sentence, then said, "If you get bored with the dance, you immediately turn around and leave," and turned away from the groom. His Majesty admitted that he was the one who had caused the scandal because his partner had stepped on his foot. The girl apologized. Carl wanted to give her advice on what should have been done if she wanted it to go well, but before he could finish, Erica was crying. The Emperor went to the railing and began to tell about the grey wolves, brigands that live in the mountains. Not far from them, there was the land of Bikalpa, which none of the 6 kings wanted to own. But the most important thing was that they built a hospital there. The bride was surprised, for Kalako relies only on the help of the temple, while Rahmi in the north has no such help, so a hospital now stands in the ancient ruins of Bikalpa. His Majesty again took the concubine by the cheeks and asked why she was looking like that, and thought that most likely he was not lying. Erica removed the emperor's hand from her face and praised him for such a deed, but the guy thought that the bride was sarcastic, from which he took offense at her, and the girl in turn began to justify herself for her words. Karl did not understand why the concubine was praising him. After all, he had heard such words 10 times a day. His Majesty once again extended his hand to the young lady to finish the first dance of her first ball. The bride accepted the proposal. During the dance, the heroine stepped on her partner's foot again, for which she immediately apologized. The guy in turn pulled her to him and apologized in return. Erica noticed that the emperor smiled. She noticed that when Karl smiles, he ceases to be such a cruel tyrant and looks like a boy, and time with him as if stopped. The heroine asked him to laugh so always, but was refused and defiantly upset at this time. Selina, maid Claudel, watching the couple from around the corner. Liz continued to be in the ceremonial hall and suddenly thought about the fact that a soft girl would not be able to get along with the ruthless emperor. But sometimes even he has moments of weakness only when no one sees. Something in him changes after all. The maid was called by Duke Oster, an old acquaintance of hers, saying he missed the girl. Elizabeth greeted the guy back. The young man tried to apologize. Liz refused to accept the apology, moved closer to him and whispered in his ear that to those who loved him, he must remain a low man and a traitor. The maid asked not to come to her with any more remorse, because she considered it a scolding over the death of a child. The Duke asked the girl not to spend the rest of her life hating him and to stop hiding in the banquet hall in a pathetic maid's costume, noted that she had done her mission well and she should go home. Liz declined the invitation, explaining that she had never thought of that place as home. Oster replied that the harem was not her home either. He promised to do whatever she wanted from a good man, to a place where ability would be appreciated. But that didn't suit Elizabeth either, for she couldn't be bribed with that. Graham figured that since they hadn't seen each other in a while, his attitude must have changed. But Elizabeth knew he only wanted someone else's life to belong to him. Liz assumed that that child should have been given a double dose, and if she wanted her dead, the maid would have done it anyway. But the child wanted the girl to live, and she would continue to live in a place where the Duke couldn't reach her. The girl did not kill her only because of him. These phrases made the guy laugh, because every time she said the same thing, Liz warned that it is not worth hiding the truth, because it will not disappear anywhere. Everyone thinks that the emperor killed that child, but she knew everything, and Cornelia's death is on his conscience. The maid called Hayden to the table. When everyone came over, the boy was already eating alone. Rudy was angry at the child's next misstep, but Elizabeth tried to reassure him that he would stop doing it when the shamefulness of his behavior was realized. She decided to pepper the dish. Hayden inhaled it. The eunuch became even more agitated, for he had warned her not to do that. The boy threw all the food from his plate onto the table. The guy grabbed the kid by the scruff of the neck and led the way, yelling that he wasn't going to deal with him anymore because he thought he was out of control. In a fit of anger, Hayden insulted Rudy. The eunuch explained that there was something else in the food, and the Dythe smelled something else entirely. The boy took the pepper pot in his hands, not understanding what was wrong with it. The child said he smelled the seeds of the casallo, a pod plant in which only one seed can throw out shoots, and the remaining seeds become poisonous. But the poison is very weak, and you can only die from it if you eat them for a long time. Rudy was frightened by this fact, because of his calmness, he forgot what the harem really was. Many girls died at the hands of the emperor, but there are many concubines who were victims of internal warfare. Hadin began to shout that he would not let Erica be hurt, for she was protecting him. The eunuch asked the boy how he knew the food was poisoned, to which the child replied that his mothers had taught him that. There were several of them, because he was from a gypsy family. Among them were those who made and sold medicines and poisons to feed themselves. Some glorified effective poisons that nobles bought. The guy was scared that not only the food might be poisoned, the whole castle needed to be inspected urgently. He praised Hadin and rubbed his head, ordering the rest of the maids to do a general cleaning and inspect absolutely every corner of the palace. Pyu complimented Erica and apologized for ruining the girl's mood, even though it wasn't on purpose. The bride didn't understand what he was talking about at first, but remembered the last incident and accepted the apology, but thought about the fact that if Rudy did that, the concubine was very disappointed and Pyu was just an errand boy. The mistress warned the eunuch that understanding alone would not be enough to bring back the former friendship. The lad rejoiced and was ready to do anything for such a beautiful lady. Pooh thought Erica was just like the other concubines and was already preparing for questions about the emperor, but she only asked for an explanation of what had happened that day, because she was still tormented by doubts. The eunuch was surprised at the question, but explained that His Majesty had a nightmare again that day. Karl is quite sensitive after such dreams. He got up on the wrong foot, and upon waking up, he immediately asked for a drink. Then the head butler ordered the lad to go to the northern palace to fetch his bride. The mistress noted that every concubine was eager to get into the emperor's bedroom. But why Cascade had asked to bring her specifically? She thought it might have been a bad influence on Hayden. The girl resented not understanding what kind of nightmares he was having, but Pyu knew nothing, assuming no one knew about them. So Erica wondered about their contents herself. The emperor sat in his office with large stacks of papers, noting that this time the bride had come much faster than he had expected. Causing him to ask her to wait a little while, Rachiel ordered her to continue reading one of the documents. It wrote that the ambassador of Telathius was pleased with the reception at Spurtown, but he still requested an audience with His Majesty. He said he could not return without meeting Karl, and wanted to see the young man at least once. The aide felt that he should be invited to a public event if His Majesty was uncomfortable with the thought of meeting in person, deeming a fencing contest or an evening at the Summer Palace a suitable event. The emperor ordered that an invitation to the contest be sent to the ambassador. Rachiel said goodbye to the master and departed. Erica was enthusiastic at the meeting. She immediately began asking questions about what she was to do this time, but Karl answered nothing and only asked the eunuchs to contribute something. On the table were put juicy, fatty dishes and sweet desserts. The bride was surprised and asked if the emperor wanted her to get fat. Karl thought that the girl should gain some weight to dance not only on the terrace, but the concubine replied that she could not stand on her feet and constantly fell. Not because of her small weight, she admitted that she thought all these things are useless. His Majesty was surprised and ordered to eat everything that was on the table. The bride started the meal all the while wondering if it was normal to eat so much. After all, the ladies said that modesty in eating was a virtue. The emperor held something unusual in his hand, asking the girl to eat it from his hands because that was the rule of eating. Erica tasted the delicacy. She didn't like it at all. The taste was both sweet and bitter at the same time. She asked what she had just eaten. It was chocolate. It had been given as a gift from Telathius. This sweetness was rare. Karl was pleased with himself. The bride was indignant. The girl thought he was doing all this to make her act reckless and was grateful. She got the flavor she wanted, but the emperor was giving himself away with his head. It didn't make it feel good. His Majesty told him that there were not many craftsmen in Telathius who could make chocolate, and aristocrats were hunting for the delicacy throughout the empire. Erica was not particularly surprised, because of which her image in the head of the groom changed a little, because she had manners and the ability to drink tea properly. Her expression was indifferent, and she seemed arrogant, but did not cause disgust, which was strange. The guy was not even angry. The concubine thought she would surprise the emperor with her reaction, but there was no response. She considered it his new image. The bride admitted to herself that the chocolate was delicious. The filling slowly melted in his mouth, leaving behind a sweet aftertaste, and it would be wonderful if the scary side of Karl's personality disappeared like this melted chocolate, leaving a sweet aftertaste. The concubine still couldn't understand why people's lives meant so little to this man, why he seemed calm while issuing sentences of horrible punishments. When he behaved violently, he invariably wore a stern mask. She could never forget the emperor's childish laughter that night. The memory of that smile made her heart start to beat harder. Karl noticed Erica's strange condition. The heroine complained of heaviness in her chest, but she had apparently eaten too much chocolate and decided that she would feel better if she drank some refreshing tea. His Majesty called the eunuch and sent him off with the order. As soon as he came out, The bride thanked the groom for dancing on the terrace. The young man was visited by a strange feeling inside, as if everything had turned upside down. A knock was heard at the door. The concubine was handed a mug of drink. While she enjoyed it, she asked about the swordsmanship competition. Karl spoke a bit about the event. The girl asked if the emperor was going to attend. After all, she had heard from Lord Carson that the lad liked jousting, and there were several other stories of His Majesty's heroism that she wanted to see in person, because they bore little resemblance to the truth. The young man offered to go with him. The concubine was glad. He warned her at once that the bride would sit behind him. Erica was surprised and explained that she would not see anything from behind. But the groom considered the competition as a place where all kinds of rabble flocked. They only do that waving handkerchiefs and shouting encouraging words to the participants. Karl allowed the duel to be watched over his shoulder, but Lady Kaur still didn't understand why the event was so dangerous for her. After a while, she realized that trying to work today would fail. Erica asked the emperor what the summer palace was. He explained that it was where they go during the hot season. It was located in the northern plateau of the capital, in Gurdwala. Karl understood that while living in the North End, the girl could not feel all the charms of summer. The concubine admitted that she had only read in books about hot sun rays, people dressed in light clothes. The emperor confirmed the bride's guesses and added that sometimes it was hard for people to breathe, but in the summer palace it was tolerable, because it was in a valley and surrounded by forest. Madame suggested that the valleys and forests here were different from those in the North End. It was no wonder the aristocrats liked to vacation in Grudwall. The country houses of noble families stood on the shores of Lake Swan. The grill was full of wealthy merchants, and the streets were filled with people. Festivals were held every few days. Fireworks were sometimes set off on the shore. All in all, it was a great place to spend the summer. Karl noticed that the girl had become much more beautiful. But what was considered the standard of beauty now, Erica did not possess. But there was something in her that stirred the emotions, touching the heart, such as large sparkling eyes, a nose like a small fruit it wanted to touch, plump lips and cute cheeks. The concubine asked to go to the private palace with His Majesty. He remembered that he was originally going to take her with him, so he agreed. The girl smiled. Karl was shocked by that smile. He asked not to smile like that again and keep playing the role of an ice bag, and covered his eyes so he couldn't see her. Erica crossed her eyes with the groom and realized how quickly she was warming up. The time spent with him seemed fun to the girl. When the bride left, His Majesty gave her a box of chocolates. The concubine wanted to share it with everyone in the northern palace. The heroine was walking through the territory of the castle when she saw smiling knights. Apparently, they went out for training. She had a stomachache. Erica did not understand from what it was. Because of chocolate or envy of the freedom of guys, because they could go anywhere, which the girl could not afford. Mistress's life revolved around one small point, the northern palace. Except for moments when, with the emperor's permission, the concubine went outside. But even there it was impossible to be alone. The life of an aristocrat seemed the most frustrating thing to her. She was approached by Lord Carson, who had heard her thoughts. He had always walked this way, but today the night's training had ended early, and the daily activities of the imperial family were wearing her out badly. Erica became agitated and asked that Ren forget everything he had heard. But he replied that it would be a lot of trouble, since not many men would ignore such a fact. The knight asked the girl to just call him by his first name. The lady wondered why he was so kind to her. The lady asked if he was a windy man, which dumbfounded the guy. Carson immediately began to apologize. He warned that he had no ill intentions, but just wanted to be friends. Erica interjected. The young man confirmed his words, and she responded by allowing herself to be addressed by her first name. She was uncomfortable being called Lady Kaur. Ren supported his new friend. The latter objected that it suited him to be called Lord Carson, because he was the commander of the order. The knight joked that his job was more like training, because his charges had to be disciplined, because many of them were disobedient. The girl sympathized with her friend, to which the latter objected that, in his opinion, every man was born with certain duties, fulfilling which he proved his own importance. The concubine praised Ren for his wonderful words. They exchanged compliments and laughed. Then the girl offered him a taste of chocolate, gave him some more to give to the others, said goodbye and left. The lord approached his charges with the gift in hand. The knights began to laugh at the commander. He was not pleased and sent them to the training ground to continue their lessons. Rudy thanked the maids for their help with the cleaning and treated them to some chocolate. But they all decided that the delicacy was poisoned because it was sent by the emperor and didn't bother tasting it. Instead, the helpers retired to the kitchen to drink some beer. The eunuch became uncomfortable with this. He saw Patricia, one of the maids, trying to offer her a treat again. The girl was a quiet person. No one noticed her. But today she was acting rather nervous. At one point, the maid stood up in a pole and screamed when another assistant ran into her. Rudy assured her that there was no poison in the candy, but she still refused. At night, everyone was already asleep when the eunuch decided to follow Patricia. Unexpectedly, Selina approached her and began to question her about what was going on. The maid suspected that she had been spotted, so she refused to continue spying, assured that no one would find out about anything, begged her not to touch her mother. The girl cried and said that she knew from the beginning that it would turn out this way. Celine walked over to the spy. Rudy stood in utter shock. Patricia screamed and fell dead to the ground. The eunuch ran over to the maid and took her in his arms to try and do something, but the spy was already dead. The lad heard the guardsman approaching and began to think what he should do, for if he left now, the murderer would hardly be found. He apologized to the dead girl and ran from there to Mr. Lakiris, who at that time was sitting in that very tower. The young man asked for help. He considered him the only one on whom the eunuch could rely. The old man thought it was necessary to kill someone, but it was Rudy who needed help to save Patricia's mum, because the maid herself was absolutely terrified. Guy assumed that Selina wanted to bribe the girl, but she refused. Claudel's henchwoman had no choice but to threaten the death of a loved one. He looked at his hands, which were all bloody. Lakiris promised that he would try to find out. Rudy thanked him, and the old man noted that he would do such a thing for the first time. He was asked to save rather than kill a man. The young man cautiously asked if the gentleman would kill someone at his request or not. The man replied that he was usually deaf to such requests from people, but looking at Rudy, he was reminded of the past, which could not be corrected. The man warned that he should not count on the result, because it was the first time he would do such a thing. Obel refused the chocolate because she couldn't stand sweet and sticky. Just the sight of the treat gave the lady a headache. Erica offered to share the delicacy with Roel, noticing that Mrs. Mavrinth was not in the best mood today. Lady Cor's friend was lying in the garden under a tree when she approached her. The girl was pleased with the guest and began to ask about the past celebration. Erica, with a smile on her face, told about her first outing. The friends sat in the shade of the trees, enjoying each other's company. When it came to the story of Claudel, Roel asked her a couple of questions. Lady Cor answered them and added that she had seen Arabella Asante from a distance. She was very beautiful. Lady Lakin said that Lady Asante was a rather unusual girl, and sometimes she came to the southern palace, then asked about her brother the emperor. The concubine was surprised at such a question. With excitement in her voice, Erica began to tell her friend about her dance with His Majesty. Carla's sister was outraged and shocked, and shared that she wanted to attend such an event herself. The bride offered Roel to go together next time, but no sooner had they agreed to meet than the emperor himself became in front of them. Erica was frightened by the appearance of the groom. The guy, in turn, asked how she knew about this place and why the bride and sister spend time together. Roel hugged Lady Cor, telling her brother that they were friends. This angered His Majesty. The girl teased him. Unable to stand the younger one's disobedience, Carl took her by the shoulder and told her that she shouldn't pretend to be a girl. After these words, he called her little brother. Roel brushed it off and explained that he wasn't pretending to be a girl, just wearing dresses because he liked them. And Erica belonged to herself, since the couple wasn't married yet. The emperor objected, calling the concubine his. The girl asked him to stop. The brother complained to his friend that his finger hurt, suspecting he had broken it. The bride continued to reprimand the groom for his behaviour. Carl started talking about the wedding, and that the couple was committed to having a celebration at the summer palace this year. Roel was surprised at his brother's words, continuing to joke about it. The emperor couldn't stand it and slapped the guy. Erica ran over to her friend to help and offered to call a healer, asking her fiancé to stop acting like this. The younger man assured her that the blow wasn't that hard. It didn't hurt him at all. His Majesty said not to worry about him. Even though Roll looked pathetic, he still had the blood of the Lakin family running through him, rebuking his brother for falling to the ground from such a light blow. Apparently Obel knew why Roll was in hiding. After all, he was the bastard child of the past emperor, a helpless child with a right to the throne. There was probably no more desirable prey for Karl's political opponents. The boy was regarded with apprehension, as if he were a wooden box full of explosives, to be hidden in a secluded place. It seemed that Roel himself thought so of himself, but Emperor Karl said otherwise. Erika was worried about her friend and his condition. Lakin Jr. had tears running down his face, but he quickly wiped them away and replied with a smile that everything was fine. It was an accident, in his opinion. His brother offered to spend time together without His Majesty because he was quite intimidating. Karl himself turned around and left as soon as he heard those words. Roel waved him goodbye, said Brother Seth had come to see him, but the Emperor didn't want to attend the meeting. He made the excuse that he had too much to do. Suddenly, Erika fainted. Noticing this, the groom immediately rushed to help the concubine. The girl came to herself only in the chambers. The healer said that she simply menarche, the first menstruation. The brothers were surprised at this news, for the bride was already 17. The healer left the bedroom, noticing that the lady had come to her senses, but before leaving, warned that it was not worth being embarrassed by the pain and talking about it immediately, also noting that the concubine had a long delay, because the first menstruation begins around the age of 15. Erika explained that she had suffered a serious injury as a child that still left her with a scar. Sometimes it hurt and festered. Then she got worse. The healer began to ask about hallucinations, a consequence of such a wound. The girl said that she saw fire, suffering, and other similar things. But she fell not because of indisposition, but because Roel called someone's name. At that moment, in the heart of the lady, everything exploded with pain, as if cauterized by fire, and after the body crumbled into shards. This name, Seth. Lady Kaur read the very nice note, thinking it was a love letter, and noticed the many gifts in front of her. Liz said that when a girl becomes a girl, it was customary to give dishes, and it made sense to use them as a dowry. She noted that most likely Lady Morant treats her concubine as her family. Erika noticed the box of fabric His Majesty had ordered to be sent. When the lady was well, a tailor would make some new dresses for the bride. The heroine saw the bright red cloth, remembering that Claudel was wearing an outfit of a similar colour, so she suggested using it. Rudy warned that Karl and Roel were going to visit the Northern Palace, so they didn't have time to fool around. The girl heard her friend's name and became excited. She complained to the eunuch about the pain in her stomach. The guy took the cloth from the mistress, asking her to be careful. Liz was teaching Erika how to make pads for herself and realised why she was acting so much more affectionate with her. She was like Cornelia. Just the thought alone made the maid's face change. Cornelia was like a doll for Duke Oster. She was destined from birth to enter into a political marriage. Despite this fate, she was nice and polite to everyone. But in the soul of the girl raging flames, once for the sake of what she herself thought was right, poor Cornelia burned her life. Liz warned Erika that she was no longer a child and would face many challenges in the future, one of which was human guile. The bride refused the maid's advice, stating that it was her way. She smiled and began to recount while the concubine lived in the north. She hated herself. She had nothing but a sense of utter helplessness. She had done nothing wrong, but life was like a punishment. These were the thoughts that visited her that very day. The heroine thought that it was her fault that she was still alive. The maid thought that this story was too bitter for a 17-year-old girl. At this time, the mistress continued. Everything changed with the move to the capital. There were some unpleasant days, but there were many more fun days. She had a lot to learn, and it was even exciting. Every day Erika had different feelings. She couldn't imagine that a funny event, or a joke that didn't make her smile before, now it brings a completely different emotion, and she is grateful to all the people who are genuinely worried about her. She is very happy to live here. Even though the path Lady Kaur was on was not much different from Cornelia's, but this road is lined with ivy and thorns, a path of pain. Can she remain as happy going forward? Liz had brought some kind of book with a lock on it, saying it was a gift from her, and she probably wouldn't need it now, but it would be very helpful in the future. Erica decided that since her maid had given it to her, it certainly made sense, comparing it to a piece of mosaic. There were enough hygiene products in the chambers. Elizabeth decided to take everything to the restroom. The mistress thanked the woman once again. Rudy entered the room. He was smiling with all his teeth and asked the concubine to look at him. 2 birds were sitting on his hand. The girl laughed. The eunuch thought they were not just birds, but those born in a dragon's nest, and one day they would become dragons themselves and learn to predict the future. Erica was happy about the boy's progress, but Liz was not so happy. Rudy asked Lady Kaur to close her eyes, mentally ask a question, and ask the great birds to reveal the future to them. In the hands of the bride were 2 pieces of paper, on which were written horse and journey. The young man approached the mistress and asked what she had wished for, to which the girl replied that she had asked what would be for lunch today. He offered to try similar to Liz, but she declined. Erica took a closer look at the papers and noticed her handwriting on them. Hayden laughed, explaining that he had copied the girl's handwriting. She praised him for it. Carl and Roel entered the chambers. The younger one had a bouquet of flowers in his hands and immediately began to burden her with questions about her well-being, after which he hugged her because he was glad that his friend was all right. The lady noticed the emperor's displeased look and thanked him for visiting her, but he didn't say a word to her. The girl thought that it wasn't her who felt bad, but him, and he was most likely very tired, but came probably because of her. Carl wanted to say something, but his brother interrupted him. Noticing the fortune birds, Erica stood in front of His Majesty. She felt a little dizzy, and her eyes darkened. She felt like there was too little space around her, even though they were standing outside. The bride was sure it wasn't because of the heat from the emperor or his body odor mingling with his perfume. Guy exhaled in relief when he noticed the bruise was gone and asked how he was feeling. The concubine said she was fine, but he rebuked her for it. For a couple of days ago, she had made everyone worried. The mistress asked in surprise if he was worried about her, but thought he was about to make the emperor angry. Carl replied that he thought the bride would die, for her face had turned white, and the lady herself had fallen senseless. Blood appeared on the floors of her clothes. The girl was embarrassed because she was running away from the emperor, who was hurting her, and she could stand up to him even if he was angry. But she didn't know what to do when she saw him like that. His Majesty wanted to add something else, but silently hugged Erica and said he thought he wanted to be near her. Then she would be safe, and proposed to her to be his wife. Erica hesitated, not sure how to react. Carl was starting to get angry because he assumed that the girl was against the wedding, but she rejected the idea, suggesting that the celebration be postponed for about a year or 2, which infuriated the groom. He said that the date had already been set for the end of August, at which time 2 purple stars would shine in the sky, and the ceremony was to take place on the night of the rising of Mars and Antares, with the exact day to be told by astrologers. About the organisation of the event was still almost unknown. The summer palace should be opened for this purpose. There was a proposal to have a banquet in a boat on the lake, or a general festival in Gurdwala. Erica didn't like it at all. She offered to make an evening where it would be just the 2 of them, and do without the crowd. Carl replied that he would think about it. The bride thanked the guy. Here, the emperor pleased the concubine with one more piece of news. He decided to pay her 110 gold pieces a year. Initially, he offered 500 gold pieces, but the request was rejected because they were not married yet. But after the wedding, he would raise the issue again. The bride began to refuse because it was too much. His Majesty warned if the money was not enough for her wishes, she could always ask for more. When he left, he wished her good health and entered the palace from the balcony. With slight anger, the bride clutched the hem of her dress in her hand and remembered the most expensive gifts in her entire life. On the day of her engagement, and one silver one given by her older brother Herder, she decided that 110 gold pieces was too much for her. Rudy was showing the fortune birds to Roel, and he was pleased. But Carl not so much. The younger one took his fortune bird and read on it, "Erica loves me more," and Big Brother is a fool, to make a joke on His Majesty, but immediately got smacked on the head, and Lakin the Elder took the papers from his hands and read their sword and crown, and the overlapped word was sea. The younger asked about his future, because it was the first time he had seen the magical birds. The emperor matched the two words in his head, and the idea of Roel longing for a crown caused him to take a sword in his hand, but fall into the sea to become fish food. His brother did not like this interpretation. Karl asked what he thought would happen today. He pondered the question. He had never held a weapon, and preferred to call himself a pacifist. He wondered about his older brother's cruelty, why all the servants that were in the corridor scattered. Lucan Jr. asked the emperor to stop scaring people and causing terror. He agreed with him. Roel handed his gift to Erica in an envelope. There was a blessing from the senior priest. Though all the gods love the girl as it is, but the friend wished for more love to come to her. She gratefully kissed the guy on the forehead, causing him to get all flushed. The brothers were about to leave. The mate wished the lady good health and promised that he would keep an eye on her fiancé. The bride looked away and saw His Majesty looking at the birds. She noticed that lately the guy was revealing himself from new sides. Roel once again wished his concubine a good rest and called out to his brother, who was still standing next to the magical animals. The younger one laughed at him, because most likely he was asking them if Erica liked him. But the older one dismissed the thought. In truth, it was not Karl that mattered to the boy now, but the fact that the secret with his real gender would be revealed. Then his quiet life would be over. It was much easier for him to be born a girl and have fun with Lady Kor, and there would be no need to live in the southern palace as in a cage. He constantly spoke to her in hints and hoped that she would understand everything. The younger Lakin did not understand if he really liked his older brother's fiancée. Obel shouted and entered the room where Junior was sitting. He didn't understand what was wrong. As soon as the old lady entered, she immediately ordered him to change into another outfit. The boy entered the study where Lady Morant was drinking tea and began to reprimand him for daring to go out in inappropriate clothing. She had seen the boy cradling his late mother's things before and sympathized with him. But now it was really time to throw away all the dresses. Roel knelt in front of his grandmother and began to hint little by little that he had more feelings for Erica than for his girlfriend. He thought their acquaintance was a simple ploy from the old lady and didn't know what to do next. Obel took her grandson by the face and told him that on his brother's advice he should begin to study, so he would not leave the palace one step during the summer, but would only get a decent education, and if he fulfilled his part of the promise, Morant would fulfill his wish. When a girl's menarche begins, she must have the blessing of the goddess. So when the pain subsided, Erica went to the temple. Rudy said that Roel asked in great detail how to train Boney and Rico, although the eunuch had trained them for fun. He thought everyone believed his joke, and he himself was beginning to believe that they were magical birds. The lady laughed, replying that her prediction had not come true at all. The boy answered her words with a joke, and they approached the temple. The girl went into a room where a large portrait of the goddess hung. A nun came up to her and called her after her, telling her the story. When the sky began to exist separately from the earth, the era of the gods came. Temples with shellfish and fish were erected for Na, who ruled the seas. Then Na created a mermaid out of the sea foam, who looked half like the goddess and the lower part like a fish. The goddess gave song to the shellfish, who were devoid of pearls. Later, Na took the earth from the seabed, dried it in the sun, and created humans out of it. Erica noted that the story sounds like a legend, but her interlocutor replied that the tears are proof because they taste as salty as seawater. The girls went into another room. With dark walls, the nun poured Mrs. Return, a medicine that allows people to hear the voice of God within themselves. The beginning of the action will be after some time, and the very first side effect is sleep. And while the bride will sleep, then the nun will pray to the goddess Na. In the dream, the girl found herself in a bright place. She was called by an unknown woman, asking if she wanted to know the truth, but quickly left. Erica shouted to the girl, asking her to wait for her. They held hands, after which the concubine found herself on the ice, next to her mother lay. She wanted to tear towards her, but was yanked back by her sleeve, telling her to run. But she didn't listen, and went that way. The mistress crouched down on her knees to get a closer look at the man, but behind her she heard the swing of a sword and the cry, "The kingdom will remain pure forever!" She squirmed and opened her eyes. Waking up, the heroine was in tears, Trying to get up from the couch, Erica had a scar. The nun ran for a healer. The nun turned out to be Arabella. The bride sat in her chambers. The healer had come to her to help with the pain. But aside from the scar, something strange was happening to her. She was having memories she didn't know she had. Return is a hallucinogen. It stupefies the mind and makes one think one has met God. The healer warned not to believe everything she saw. Erica wondered where her scar came from, but even the healer couldn't answer. He only hoped that the girl could find the answer herself. Sergio explained that there were two completely different wounds inside the concubine. The first was related to the soul, and for a long time the man had been researching its treatment, but it was still beyond the healer's competence. There was only one box that they managed to get. In it lay a clam. Erica tried to open it, but it didn't work. Sergio told her that the thing looked like a clam, but in fact, it was much more valuable, and he waited a long time for the shell to open on its own. The attempts were unsuccessful. The healer gave it to the bride, with the request to try to open the shell, and then she could learn about everything. By the time the feelings became colder than a northern cyclone, the move to the summer palace had begun. The place where the bride would live was called the Butterfly Palace, newly built. It was the closest to the castle where His Majesty lives. The emperor couldn't come himself, but sent the girl a guard. Diana, the daughter of Lord Gartis, and his wife Baya. The concubine was very surprised. The girl shared the rumours that it was Erica who proposed the construction of a medicine house in Bicalpa, and now that Diana was by her side, she didn't have to worry about her safety. The guard looked reliable, which made the bride even more happy. During the ride, the lady's carriage stopped in a small clearing to have a snack. The heroine asked if the emperor had travelled the same road, to which Liz replied that this route was considered one of the shortest to the palace. The girl continued to ask about Karl. This time she had the thought that he would hardly be able to sit in the shade of a tree and enjoy the meadow. The maid confirmed the bride's doubts, for her fiancé was a busy man. More likely than not, he passed through here very quickly. Erica thought that if His Majesty were here, he would definitely smile. The bride had already been in the Butterfly Palace for days. She was unimaginably bored. Rudy entered the chambers with a warning that the lady had visitors. She got up from the table she was sitting at, because she was sure that Karl had arrived. The girl was worried. She didn't know where to start the conversation and what expression to show on her face. Ren entered the bedroom. His bride was just as pleased to see him. The lord thought his friend was going mad with boredom, but noticed what she was doing at her desk. Erica was drawing from memory the map she had seen in the emperor's study. Carson was surprised at the concubine's skills and asked when she would portray the view outside. She wanted to know if it required going outside. The knight wanted to apologize for his words, but couldn't. The guy came to convey the words of His Majesty, which were to comfort the heroine, and handed her an envelope. It contained an order that allowed Erica to go out and even visit noble ladies. But she did not want to go out to meet aristocrats. The girl dreamed of looking at Lake Swan. Probably the colour of the water is very beautiful. The sand on the shore of the lake looks like pearl powder. The concubine heard that when the wind rises, waves rise over the water like folds on the curtains, and near the lake live beautiful white swans, which confirm the name. Ren warned that the birds didn't come every day, so it wasn't likely to be too interesting there. The bride was upset because there was a chance she wouldn't be able to see the lake. It was too far away from the emperor's residence. The knight asked the sad heroine to give him some more time. He wanted to show the thing that Erica had to like. The friends were walking through the woods. The bride was on horseback, Lord Carson leading the animal beside her. The concubine was already in great excitement, though they had not even reached the right place yet. It was a pleasure to walk along the path, admiring the manicured trees and blooming flowers. Travelling on horseback was much more fun than in a carriage. Ren warned that now they would have to walk. The girl wanted to show a trick and deftly jumped from the saddle to the ground, which scared the guy, because she could hurt herself. But everything was fine. This forest is between the Emperor's summer residence and the Butterfly Palace. If it wasn't for the trees, they could see the summer palace. After a couple minutes, the friends arrived at the right place. The bride was surprised at what she saw. In front of Erica was a tree dotted with brightly coloured flowers. But it turned out that these flowers were not blooming on the tree, but it was campsis, a plant that had entangled the tree and begun to bloom. The girl noticed that the guy's face burned in the sun. He explained that it always happens in the summer. The concubine said that in the north, so that the skin does not burn, they apply the fat of a sea lion, so it was worth finding a couple of seals and make a cream from them. In addition to the cream, we need to find Ren a wife to smear on his face, Erica laughed. The commander did not understand what this was about. The bride said that in her homeland, only the wife can smear fat on the hunter when he goes hunting. The guy decided that a wife is something unattainable for him, because he doesn't have a fiancé due to practicing self-discipline. The commander noticed the concubine had a flower on her dress and removed it. Carl sat in his study, angry again at the fact that Erica had not sent him a single letter, for he had provided her with the finest palace for lodging. Cassad alerted that the artists had arrived. They entered the room. The emperor thanked them for coming, began to tell them that only one of these outstanding artists would be able to take a place on the staff of court painters, and as an entrance test, one would have to paint the butterfly palace. If all goes well, it would be nice if the bride, after successfully completing the test, would become their model. His Majesty looked out the window, full of hope that the concubine would deign to visit her fiancé. After standing for a while, he decided to go outside for some air. Carl was walking through the forest when he spotted Erica along with Ren. The knight greeted his Majesty. The girl turned around in surprise. The emperor blushed and didn't say a word. The bride kept calling him. He couldn't stand it and yelled at her to stop doing that, not understanding what friends forgot in that place. Ren explained that since His Majesty liked the place, Lady Kor would definitely not be indifferent. Carl noticed that the girl was doing well. Erica remembered to thank him for the opportunity to live in such a wonderful place. The commander decided to leave the pair alone. He bid them farewell and left. The emperor didn't understand why he decided to do that. The concubine called out to His Majesty once more. The groom removed a flower from her dress, put the girl in, and asked her to call him by his name. Erica recounted her experiences on the way back from the capital, surveying the scenery along the way. She remembered Carl's face. At that moment, she frantically wanted to know what the emperor was busy with at that moment. A wind blew, and flowers flew from the tree and covered the girl from head to toe. His Majesty began to remove them from her hair and explained that any time he was overcome with thoughts of someone, he would call out to that person, and if he was angry with someone, once the emperor saw his bride, he would stop being angry. The couple came to the river. The banks were lined with flowers. On the dock stood an old boat on which Carl had never ridden, so the girl asked him to wait a little, and Erica herself went to the boat and began to untie it, after which, sat in it, the emperor followed the bride. The concubine took the oars in her hands, warned that there was no need to be afraid, and tried to row away from the shore, but nothing came out. His Majesty explained that there was no need to try, because the current would pick up the boat itself. He took the oars from the girl, and the pair set sail away from the shore. Erica was absolutely delighted. At one point, Erica gathered water in her hands and splashed it towards the emperor. He was enraged and splashed his fiancée back. His Majesty let go of the oar to fix his concubine's wet hair. A few seconds later, the boat flipped over. The couple was in the water. The guy held the girl above the current. She laughed and hugged her fiancé. She really wanted to smile. Ren was walking through the forest when he felt that someone was not far from him. He wondered who this person was chasing him or Erica. He looked behind a tree. There stood a surprised Rudy. The knight asked who he was, to which the guy explained that he was Erica's court eunuch. The commander didn't understand why the butler was following his mistress, to which he replied that he was making sure nothing happened to the girl. The young men began to discuss that they had noticed an unknown man in the forest. Rudy said that he tried to catch him, but he couldn't and didn't tell anyone, because it happened many times at court. It's quite possible that there could be a spy here, and until there is no proof, it's not worth making a fuss. It will only become an extra reason to attack the lady. Erica attended Countess Laura's reception, where she had fun with other aristocrats. The hostess of the event told her that there was also a lake in the garden of the Summer Palace that was as beautiful as Lake Swan. So, it was called Mini Swan. The Keeley family is a clan that maintains neutrality. But why did Lady Kor, who declined invitations, come here? After all, she was also called by families close to the emperor. One of the guests offered the countess to play the harp, which pleased the concubine because she had often heard of the girl's beautiful playing. The countess thought that Erica did not look like the emperor's chosen one, but since she had survived the bloody night, she was definitely an unusual girl. The guests made their way to the drawing room where Laura was playing the harp, the aristocrats discussing the countess's good playing skills, for she had only recently begun to master the instrument. One of the girls started talking about her ability to play the piano. Erica wanted to hear it too, to which she received an invitation to the girl's estate, to which she agreed, boasting of her official permission from the emperor to walk around. Lately, the bride's throat had been getting scratchy. She suspected she might have a summer cold. After all, she had fallen in the water a few days ago. An unknown woman appeared on the other side of the room. She nodded her head. Erica thought the girl was calling her to follow her, so she got up and followed her. The bride approached her and asked her what she wanted from her, to which she asked to see her hand, saying she had come at the request of Mistress Arabella, grabbed the concubine's hand and examined the palm. The girl noticed some dots on her arm. The unknown woman warned that it was undesirable for Erica to become a Gwibi, for after her marriage, Arabella would have to become a Hwanbi. She noticed that Madame's throat had been bothering her lately, which could be a symptom of poisoning, so they would inspect the entire butterfly palace, even though the palace had been inspected before arriving and had recently increased security. The unknown woman warned the lady that there might be an extremely poisonous snake somewhere around here. After saying that, she decided that her mission was over, so she needed to go. Hayden looked at Lady Cor's hands where black dots were appearing. Most likely the poison was in the candle wax. Somewhere there was a powder of poisonous herbs or a harmful mineral. Liz wondered how the unknowns could have done such a thing, with all the inventory in the locked pantry, and Rudy decided he needed to be much more careful not to let it happen again. Diana sat on her knees in front of Erica and began to apologize for what had happened, believing that she was responsible for poisoning her mistress. She was determined that she would find the culprit and cut off his hands to bring them to her fiancé, which frightened the others. They began to dissuade her from doing so. The maid asked the guard to bring the guardsman to make a formal complaint to the Imperial Guard. Since they had proof, the eunuch suggested continuing the search. After all, there was a chance of discovering something else. Liz offered her mistress to drink tea to get the poison out of her system, and worried about her mistress's condition. After Lebra's words, Erica said that everything was fine, and it was even good that the girl was being straightforward, and remembered her words about Arabella having to become a Hwanbi. So, she had a question. Why wouldn't Claudel and Arabella become Hwanbi? The maid explained that Lady Arabella came from the noble Asante family. Like Cornelia, they had been prepared from childhood to become Hwanbi. But after discussing the candidates for the role, Lady Asante had taken a vow of chastity, which meant that until a certain condition was fulfilled, she would remain innocent, a condition that His Majesty must be aware of, for he had signed the contract. A girl who has taken a vow cannot become empress, so Arabella is forced to remain in the status of concubine. Claudel does not rise in her status because her family has a bad reputation. They got rich by engaging in the slave trade. A long time ago, Fried Tubo sailed under a pirate flag and plundered the islands he encountered. He kidnapped the locals and then sold them, even though the slave trade is now vetoed. But people are still sold on the black market because the mines and farms still need labour. Until the demand subsides, this vicious cycle will continue. There was a war where Lancia, vulnerable in battles at sea but remained a major power. On the other side, Rapika was an island kingdom of small area but with a good navy, so it was impossible to say who would win the war. Then Fried Thubo appeared and dedicated his sails to the ruler of Lancia, Blake, thus contributing to the battle. There were two reasons for the outrage of the Thubo family: the slave trade and the terrible act of Fried himself, because this man swore allegiance to His Majesty Blake, and under his name led a pirate fleet to Rapika. It is not known exactly, but it is likely that it was Fried Thubo who achieved the surrender of Rapika. Thubo took the Rapika princess Afriyi hostage, and by threats forced the queen to drown herself in the sea. His Majesty Blake, a man who valued honour, he recognised Fried's merit and gave him one last chance. If he did not leave the slave trade and repent of all his sins, he would be demoted, but Tubo rejected the offer, saying that he would not stop trading and did not regret what he had done. His Majesty rejected fried tubo for a long time. Then he offered a deal. It was connected with the treasure of Rapika. Eric was surprised that Liz knew so much about the story. The maid explained that her older brother, who she had lived with years ago, had liked her. When it came to her family, the woman remembered that there was little time left before the lady's wedding. As soon as Erica arrived at the Northern Palace, she had doubted whether the day would come. But the wedding should be unforgettable. The vows would be recited on a ship sailing on the lake. The days leading up to the gala were hectic. For the most part, things were going smoothly. But the culprit who brought the candles had never been caught. Lady Kaur had already started handing out invitations to the ceremony. Many noblewomen were happy for her and supported her. But the girl wondered what would happen to her after the wedding. After all, she had not yet told the emperor about her scar, because in the beginning, the lady was afraid of His Majesty's anger. But when Karl began to smile little by little, she was afraid that the smile would fade and the warm look would turn icy again. But although she was afraid to run away under no circumstances, she had to tell him everything. Karl, along with Ren, were on a hunting trip where they shot a boar, which seemed small to the emperor. So it could be bypassed. He suggested his friend go deeper into the forest to find deer or bear dens. The night warned that Lady Kaur had arrived, which surprised the guys, but Diana came out of the carriage. Ren introduced herself. The guard greeted the commander in return, and the knight offered her to visit the order at any time convenient for her, because her experience could be useful to other participants, to which the girl willingly agreed. Karl realized that Erica might be in the carriage, so he opened it and sat down opposite the bride, began to tell about the killed boar he wanted to give her as a trophy. But the girl looked sad. His Majesty offered to take her wherever she wanted to go, if it was because of the hunt, and warned her that he would protect his concubine from anyone she need not have feared. Erica said that there was one thing that the emperor didn't know about yet, and if he told her, it was likely that the guy would get angry because of what he had heard. The groom assured the lady that everything was fine, after which she said about the fact that she had a scar on her body. Karl reacted very calmly. His reaction surprised the bride. He asked why he had to be angry about his concubine's old wound. The emperor moved closer and admitted that he too had scars all over his body. Erica hugged His Majesty and tearfully thanked him. Karl said that such things didn't bother him. It was all irrelevant. The guy was only worried about the couple's wedding tomorrow and asked the girl to stop crying so that the ceremony wouldn't look funny because of the bride's puffy eyes. The emperor said that his grandmother had given the concubine a gift. Apparently, she was very saddened by the fact that she would not be able to attend the ceremony. The couple got out of the carriage where Saul's horse stood. Erica missed her so much. She was excited and went over to pet the animal. Karl offered to walk around the area for a bit, which the mistress gladly agreed to. The girl admitted that she felt strange about the approaching wedding, because she did not fully realize that it was her who was getting married. The groom warned that all the basic preparations were already completed, so it was definitely not worth worrying. He offered to go back to the camp to drink cold champagne. He offered his bride his hand to let her down from the horse, but was refused because the girl could get down from it herself. Erica grabbed the animal's mane with her hands, but suddenly felt pain in her hands. She looked at them and saw blood on her palms. Karl felt that something was wrong and called out to the girl. The concubine looked at him, but everything blurred in her eyes, and she fell right into the hands of the young man. The emperor took the bride to the healer, where the latter took a scalpel in his hands and was already bringing it to the infected palm of the lady. But His Majesty grabbed the hand with the medical instrument, not understanding why the healer was going to make an incision on the girl's hand, to which he received an explanation that it was necessary to remove the poison from the body. Erica looked very pale. Sergio walked over to her and touched her forehead, asking how long she had been in this state. Karl told him that less than an hour ago, the girl had passed out when she got off her horse and pricked herself on a needle in her mane. The concubine's condition was extremely serious. The healer had never encountered such poison. This phrase made the groom angry. He began to threaten that if Sergio couldn't save the bride, everyone in this room would lose their heads to his sword. Sergio bowed and replied that if the lady of the Northern Palace died, he was willing to atone for her death with his blood, because he had already lived enough. The emperor was upset, because not long ago he had promised to protect her. Sergio thought that after the lady's death, His Majesty would go mad with grief, and even if they cut off the head of the healer, nothing would change, and there was a possibility that Karl would go mad. What would happen to the empire then, and what future would await the imperial family? In the old man's opinion, the Lord will make a real bloodbath. Then it will be impossible to keep the throne. The healer promised to keep Lady Cor alive, and thought about how long ago the emperor had such deep feelings. Diana blamed herself for Mistress's condition. Ren also blamed his carelessness for what happened. Unexpectedly, Hadin said that it was the poison crystal spider that his mommy Zatu created. Rudy asked the boy to repeat again. The crystal spider does not kill its prey, but paralyzes it to feed its cubs with live flesh. Its body temperature drops and the victim falls into anabiosis. Even when the spiders start eating the flesh alive, it feels nothing. The spider has a strong venom, but if exposed to it, the poisoned component is neutralized. Zatu's mommy has been looking for a remedy that would maintain this effect for a sufficient amount of time for a long time, and if she found one. Hadin said that the crystal spider's ovaries must contain an antidote. The insect lays its eggs before winter begins. Ren interrupted the boy by asking where to find Zatu's mother. The child replied that she did not prepare antidotes, but Mama Arfa could help with that. People often came to her and called Sweet Arfa of Shamvi. No one had heard of Shamvi before. Hadin explained to the elders that Shamvi was not a village or town. They would not be able to find antidotes there. Rudy remembered hearing something similar called Shamvi Violet. The commander ordered to find the place and send knights there. The eunuch remembered that Shamvi was the name of a brothel. Erica still hadn't come to her senses. Karl had been by her side the whole time. Liz entered the chambers with information about the antidote, warning that Lord Carson had already gone to the capital to look for it. The Emperor took the girl's hand and realized that her body temperature kept dropping. Then he took off his shirt, covered his bride with it, and lay down next to her, asking her not to die, and kissed her forehead. Ren arrived at the right place, surprised to see where the heritage of the ancient dynasty was being sold at exorbitant prices. Masked men were everywhere. Diana stepped out of the carriage. The commander asked her to behave casually. Hayden tugged at the knight's clothes and began whispering something about the lovely harp in his ear. A guy came out of the building and greeted them with loud speeches. Ren immediately said that they had come in search of the lovely harp. The unknown man replied that the company had come to the right place and asked them to follow him. The four followed the guy. After a few minutes they arrived at the right place. The young man opened the door a little and noticed a lot of herbs on the shelves of the room and realized they were in the right place. As soon as they walked in, Hayden immediately rushed into his mother's arms. The girl was happy to see him. Ren greeted Arthur and said he needed an antidote. The child explained to his mother that Zarthu had poisoned Lady Erica with the poison of the crystal spider. This worried Arthur a little. The gypsy gave the commander 2 vials. The brown one had an antidote, and the green one had a medicine that was supposed to bring the body back to life, and if they did the right thing with these liquids, the girl would wake up. Ren thanked Arthur. The mother patted her son on the head and praised him for his courage. The knight asked if the gypsy woman was his mother, to which he learned that she was not his biological parent, but still considered her son. Gypsy women sought out and trained talented children to carry on their work. Hadin was the youngest of all, but had very good skills. But due to his age, the boy did not realize what he was doing. Harp was going to make the child her apprentice. The least she had to do was give up working with poisons. Zarthu also wanted Hadin as her apprentice. The woman was practically obsessed with him, and she had no choice. Ren shouted at the girl, because he thought she was responsible for the boy falling into the hands of the slave traders. But Harp explained that it would be hard for the boy to understand her intentions. Gypsies took a dark path. They used to be just wanderers looking for paradise on earth. But when potions became famous, the wandering ended. They began to create strong poisons, accumulating wealth after selling them, because of which they became known as Gypsy Mui. The knight thought that the poisons in their recipe were incredibly expensive, so the Mui were hiding in a neighborhood in the heart of the capital. Harp went on, and said that Zartu hadn't found Hadin because he was in the emperor's palace. Ren thanked the sorceress for her help, and hurried back to the palace. The gypsy woman did not ask for any payment. Instead, She warned that the potions were not in her possession by accident, and if Zatu had secretly sold the poison, she had gotten the antidote made by Harp along with it. The sale of poison along with the antidote was sold together if the intent was not to kill, but simply to intimidate, warn, or want to buy time. Diana remembered tomorrow's wedding and thought of someone poisoning Erica to postpone the wedding. Harp warned that they should forget everything that happened today and act in secret, so that next time no one would use a poison that couldn't be neutralized. After all, the people who came to see her came back very often. Sometimes they asked her for advice. Sometimes they asked for new essences. Ren promised that he would do everything he could to get the gypsy to meet with Hadine again, but the girl warned him not to do so, for Zatu might find out about it, and meetings were best avoided. Arfa handed her son some sack and kissed him goodbye. Unknown people entered the building. The gypsy woman warned that she had guests, but among them was Zatu, who began to accuse Arfa of betrayal and demanded to give up Hadine. Diana realized that this same girl had sold the poison to someone, so she demanded in return that she tell them who the buyer was. One of the attendants began to flirt with the guard, to which he received in return only a blow from the girl. The gypsy ordered to grab the child. Diana drew her sword and wounded Zatu's arm. Ren also prepared to defend himself, shouting to Arfa that they should hide. The girl called them after her. They went out through the back door, but there they were, intercepted by an unknown man, who led the company to the gypsy woman and seized Hadine. Zatu thought this child was the future of their clan. The mother began to plead with Isaac to not allow the boy the life they were living. The boy kept saying that Harp had betrayed their clan, and she had a chance to be a slave again, to live like their ancestors and live like the clans unprotected. He reminded her how they dealt with traitors. Rudy stood behind Isaac with a knife in his hand. Hayden fell unconscious. Smoke enveloped the room. The fire started. Harp led the others to get him out, taking the boy in her arms and handing him to Ren to take care of. She went to help the others out of the fire, kissing her son goodbye. Carl woke up in the middle of the night. There was no Erica beside him, which scared him, but the girl was standing nearby with a frightened expression on her face. The bride said she was only a fading magical incarnation because the child was dying. The Emperor replied that he won't let her die, to which the ghost asked if the guy is going to save her. If he wants to do that, then she can save the life that is barely flowing inside, but this time will do someone else. It's the people who are worried about her, and they are on their way here for rescue. His Majesty rejoiced that the antidote had been found, while the incarnation continued to ask why the young man was fighting for the girl's life, for she knew that Erica must die at his hands. Carl became angry and asked the spirit to be silent. He demanded that the evil entity leave the bride's body, deeming it nonsense that his concubine died because of him. The ghost replied that he couldn't do that because it was a curse that took her life, and if nothing was done, the guy's hands would be stained with blood. The Emperor hugged the girl and said that none of this would come true, Erica continued. She said that Carl was not a sacrificial lamb, but magic would touch him too, and the only thing that mattered was that when the wish came true, she would have to take away one thing that was important to him, because the contract was already made. His Majesty became even more angry, believing that her every word was nonsense, demanded that the evil spirit come out of the girl's body. After these words, the concubine fell on the bed. The Emperor began to feel like he was going mad. He got out of bed and walked to the windowsill where tears were on it. The guy was surprised that he was able to let himself cry. The eunuch called out to His Majesty saying that Commander Ren Carson had gotten the antidote and had returned. The day of the wedding came, but Erica had not recovered completely. Though she had taken her medicine, Liz told the healer that not all the guests knew what had happened, but Lady Grimple had explained it all to them and was escorting them back. Ren offered to hurry to get things in order. What was he going to do to help? Hayden asked about Mother Harp. The knight said the fire was spreading too fast. The fire had managed to put out, but they couldn't find anyone in the basement. The child cried and went outside, calling for Erica and his mum. He remembered the gypsy woman's song about the trip to Avalium of the little bugs, and with their tiny wings they could fly anywhere. The boy was singing a song, choking back tears. When someone behind him continued to sing it, he turned around to see who it was and saw a girl. Hadine asked who she was. The unknown only asked him to continue the song and explained that they called this place Erzalem. The boy sat down on the grass. They continued singing. Celine asked how he knew the song, and the child told him that Mother Harp had taught him. The girl was about to leave, but Hayden asked her not to. She turned around asking what he wanted from her. The boy only questioned where she was going. Celine said she had a few things to do, and they would meet again, and said goodbye. When the maid entered Claudel's bedroom, the mistress asked what outfit she should choose, but made the choice herself. The girl moved closer to Selene and whispered in her ear that they were going to admire the magnificent fireworks tonight, so she should have changed her clothes because they already had to leave for the banquet. The maid thought of Hadin, wondering where Avilium, their homeland, was, in search of which the family continued to travel, and there were almost no places left where the clan's foot had not set foot. Erica continued to sleep as Carl stroked her face, asking about his fiancé's condition. He warned that there was nothing to worry about, and she should just get a good night's rest. If anything was needed, he would get whatever the girl asked for. She asked the groom to call her by name. He gladly did so and kept stroking the concubine's face. The girl was surprised. He touched her forehead to check her temperature. It seemed to him that the bride had fever. Embarrassed, Erica asked the groom to stop behaving like that. He hugged her and asked her to open her eyes. The concubine regretted that the wedding did not take place, Carl reassured her, saying that they would choose another day, and it was more important to him that he could hug the girl now and asked her to be careful. Erica stroked her fiancé's cheek and promised that she would be more careful from now on. The couple kissed. Arabella was on her way back to the lakeside when Lady Grimple spoke of the bride and her condition, which had improved after the antidote. At Viscount Norbert's suggestion, they all decided to light lanterns and offer prayers for the lady's recovery, and the goddess would answer their prayers. Claudel arrived at the scene of the ceremony and was surprised by Lady Asante's visit. She condemned Lady Thubault for being in good spirits when Erica was in such a terrible condition. But the girl was not deterred, for the nobleman offered prayers for the health of the mistress of the northern palace. Arabella shouted to her concubine to go back to her room, which made the girl laugh, saying that no one had the right to tell her what to do but His Majesty. The night that day was lovely. The moon sparkled silver in the clear sky. 2 red stars could be seen in the sky, and the wedding must have been beautiful if it had taken place. Claudel told Lady Asante to listen carefully. She began to talk about not touching the girl, only because of her funny promise, and she should have kept her vow properly. After all, the Emperor belonged only to Lady Thubault, and she was the first to find him and love him the longest. One day, besides her, the groom would have no one left. Only then would he realize the love of a concubine. Erica looked at the bag of Hadin's herb that was not poisonous. It was simply chopped and dried. The bride offered to show it to Mr. Sergio, because the boy's mother wanted her gift to help those in need as soon as possible. The girl hugged the child and praised and tickled him. Liz went into the bedroom and started screaming for the mistress to stop behaving like that, gave her medicine and letters. One of them was sent by Roel. The guy wrote that the Butterfly Palace was a dangerous place, but the most dangerous was to be near the Emperor, and those who harboured a grudge against the concubine would use the moment of weakness. He really wanted to be near the girl at that moment, but he couldn't leave the residence. He warned that Arabella could be trusted. She would be able to help the bride. Erica asked Liz to help her drive to a place. After reading the letter, Carl came to the bride, kissed her hand and asked how she was feeling. In turn, the girl offered to have a cup of tea in the living room. The couple embraced. The guy admitted that he missed his concubine. Although they saw each other in the morning, the heroine took the groom's cheeks, but he did not like it. He thought that he was treated like a child, although he behaved exactly the same. Without saying a word, the Emperor pulled Erica to him and kissed her forehead. The lady said that she would have to leave for a while, but her fiancé did not want to let her go, because in the Butterfly Palace the girl had nothing to be afraid of. But she remembered Arabella and said that she could not stay here. The concubine recalled Patricia's death in the Northern Palace. There were rumours that the maid was the victim of a conspiracy against her. The guy was angry at everyone but his fiancée and didn't want to let the girl leave. After all, she was perfectly safe in the Emperor's palace. Claudel sat by the window in her estate at night, remembering Erica, having promised that any place she escaped to from the Butterfly Palace would be her grave. The noblewomen were vacationing on the shores of Lake Swan when they found the dead girl. The assistant in Carla's office was recounting what had happened. The dead girl turned out to be a maid in the Butterfly Palace. A suicide note was found in her room, with many angry remarks against Lady Kaur. The emperor was infuriated by this phrase. He thought the note was a fiction and a forgery, and even if it was true, the aristocracy and the public would by no means believe it. The butler said that after this incident, everyone would definitely remember Ayaraya, and despite the secrecy of the note, rumours that the mistress of the Northern Palace was the reincarnation of Ayaraya had already begun to spread. His Majesty thought Erica was quite different. A servant offered to personally present the bride to the mother dogs of Parliament to prove her innocence. Karl was angry. The groom said he would grant the demands of Parliament, but until the fuss died down, the girl would be away from the summer palace, and ordered the suicide note to be burned and no evidence of it to be found. Ren, along with Karl, went out to see the lady off. She kept assuring him that everything would be all right. The emperor kissed the bride's hand, promising that they would definitely have a wedding when the girl returned. Erica got into the carriage and drove away. The knight said that the place where the concubine was sent was safe, so there was no need to worry. The bride was travelling with Arabella to Longbell Convent, where Lady Asante was, when she was having a hard time. The heroine was introduced as the younger sister of the lady, so she should have come up with a different name. Erica said she would be called Maria from now on, Asante agreed. The nuns welcomed the girls with joy. Abbess Serna greeted Maria with a hug. One of the abbess's attendants introduced herself. Her name was Mito, and the guests were given a tour of the monastery's surroundings and led into Arabella's bedroom. Mito told her that the building was built by the Asante family. While the lady was staying here, Rika asked if Rudy could stay with her when she arrived. She was told that the eunuch would be housed separately, and there would be no problem with a place for him. The girl collapsed on her bed from exhaustion. She couldn't help feeling like she was back home, because the Imperial Palace and Butterfly Palace were too luxurious. She remembered Carla. The concubine blushed, noting that she had been thinking too much about His Majesty lately. The bride went out in the afternoon, because she had heard from Arabella that she was going to help with the work at the convent in the afternoon, and wanted to be useful too. Erica was asked to take the sheets off the rope for the nursing home, where Lady Asante would also be present. Mito, along with Maria, brought towels for the lady. In return, she asked for some boiling water to be brought, but the nun shouldn't have pushed herself too far. The concubine saw Arabella washing the old people and offered to help her instead of the nun. When the girls were done with helping at the nursing home, the bride looked exhausted, even though they had both worked up a sweat. Asante offered her friend a little walk. Arabella told her that there was a time when despair took over her, and it was because a person dear to her mistress had received wounds that could not be healed. Hope died inside. It was then that she met Abbess Serna, and her words struck a chord with her. Even if our bodies are beyond our control, their true appearance does not change. Lady Asante never served under the church because of religiosity or a charitable spirit. She did it all because she thought it was necessary. But Mary had no need to labour and help with the hard work. The abbess heard the whole conversation between the girls and praised Arabella for the words she said. She asked what the bride felt when she helped those in need, and if there was any response within her, just as God gives parents the love of a child to care for them, to all men he gave a heart to love others. After saying that, the concubine blushed. Serna thought she already had a favourite. In her opinion, Erica didn't know what to do, and she wants to figure it out. Karl didn't look well. The servant offered to call a healer, but the emperor refused. His condition was such because he hadn't slept all night and asked to finish for now. His Majesty filled the glass with alcohol and then drank. He was only thinking about Eric. He had a feeling that everything would come to this. But then, there was a knock on the door. An artist came into the study to show one of the sketches. His name was Alonso. Karl thanked him for the painting, and the artist walked out. The sketch was of a smiling Erica. Rudy entered the brothel, where he arranged to meet his friend Simon to remind him of his request. The guy said nothing was known yet, but he asked the neighbourhood kids to look into the house if anything happened. Louise burst into the room, who surprised the guy with her visit. The girl ran up to the eunuch and hit him. Louise shouted at him, demanding to explain why he did this, why he became a eunuch. Rudy said it was the only way to cure the disease and save the girl. Louise started screaming that she didn't want that, but the guy's only wish was to see her by his side till the last. If his lover didn't get proper treatment, the spots could have spread all over her body, causing her to die. Louise began to accuse him that they could not be together, but the young man promised that very soon he would return to her. But the girl did not believe, because she knew that eunuchs cannot leave the harem for the rest of their lives. In her opinion, the guy always ran away because he was afraid of being abandoned. With tears in her eyes, she recalled that as a child, he had always followed her around, had been like a little brother to her, but had suddenly decided that he was now the elder among the two of them, blamed him for running away when he found out about her feelings for him and pretending to make a huge sacrifice. But Louise would never betray him. She thought they could stay together until the very end. But the guy left her. All she had to do was live the life she owed to Rudy. The girl ran away in tears, leaving the eunuch bewildered and regretful. Erica followed the same routine as the nuns. The most important part of the job was that she had to entertain the patients who were housed within the walls of the nursing home. One of the girls was telling her concubine her story. When her husband wanted to get rid of her because of her illness, the whole world disgusted the patient, especially her husband. She hated him for doing that to her. It was all the fault of the arrow that had unluckily hit her lower back. She blamed herself for the miss, the thought swirling around in her head that the best way out was death. Mary cried over the story. The sick woman pitied her. Mito came into the room and warned her that Arabella was leaving soon. The girls stood by the carriage and discussed the past days, which passed in peace and quiet. Lady Asante said that if there had not been a period in her life when she had lived as a novice and relied on the convent, there would not be her present one, for she walked the streets in a thick veil and looked at the real world. She hoped that the time the bride would spend here would do her good. Mito noticed Fidesz standing nearby and couldn't take his eyes off his mistress. Her sister warned her not to worry about him, but she had to remember that the man could have a temper, especially if you tried to do something for him. Most likely it hurt his dignity. The nun said it was better to pretend that she knew nothing and offered to help in the kitchen while she went to the market for bread. Maria was peeling potatoes when a man approached her and frightened her. She screamed. Rudy noticed this and tried to defend the mistress, but the girl assured him that everything was fine. One of the cooks entered the kitchen and started accusing the concubine of slacking when Erica tried to calm the eunuch down. The guy suggested that she go back to the dormitory to talk there. Mito came back from the market. The bride introduced them to each other. Rudy started talking about the hard life of a butler. Maria tugged his sleeve and asked him to stop. He apologized. The heroine had a complete feeling that something was clearly wrong. The young man said he should rest. Erica started to calm the guy down and said that everyone loved him and the gender of the eunuch didn't matter. Without him, the girl wouldn't last a minute. Rudy bowed and apologized to Mito for the words he had said when they first met, but the nun objected, taking all the blame. Maria warned that the eunuch was here to help her, and the others should not hesitate to ask for help. The guy reminded to be careful, even if the place seemed calm to the concubine, and especially that man should be cautioned. Because His Majesty had hardly gotten on the trail of the criminals, the two of them were awaiting interrogation. After lunch, Mito suggested that Erica go with her to get wine for the ceremony, and the distillery owner himself drove them to the church service. The nun asked how Bobby was doing. He said he was fine, but his grapes needed rain, so he went to the temple to pray. The girl rebuked that the goddess would not listen to the prayers of such believers. The man thought he had arrived too late. He was afraid that the count would be very angry, so he left the inhabitants of the monastery in the carriage and went to the guests himself. Mito suggested that Rudy and Maria look at the warehouse where the wine was maturing. Everyone agreed. The concubine was absolutely thrilled. She could hear the sounds of the wine fermenting as if it were alive. As the girls were talking, the eunuch heard footsteps and called out to the mistress to hide. Bobby saw Mito in the warehouse and kicked her out of there. She resisted and said that Maria and Rudy were missing, but he wouldn't listen to her. When the friends were left alone, Erica became worried about the guy. She thought something had happened while they had not seen each other. He said he kept bothering Mistress and was good for nothing as a human being. He remembered Louise's angry face. The young man thought that she was right and should not have done everything quietly and waited for gratitude for a sacrifice that no one asked for. He was tormented by the thought that the girl would never forgive the guy. She never did what he expected. The bride looked sympathetically at her friend, he continued. He thought that the beloved had left to find a better life, but didn't think of Rudy. The guy didn't know what he should live for now. The concubine hugged the eunuch and said that now she would live for him, and he should live for her. The nun beckoned to Mary and gave her the letter, and told Emily she would go away for a little while, the patient requesting that on her return she would write a letter for her brother, who could give it to her husband, at her dictation. The bride asked what the girl wanted to write in her letter. She replied that she didn't know yet, but the first thing she would say was that she was doing well. It turned out that Lady Morant was ill, but they weren't too worried about her. The old lady was quite strong, so it was not for nothing that she became the godmother of the Lakin family. Erica noticed that the carriage was not checked. It was all because the document had Obel's signature on it. Apparently, this allowed unimpeded entry into the palace grounds. The bride said she had never heard of this road, though she had been to the Southern Palace many times. Rudy replied that there were probably more secrets the girl didn't know about. Mr. Lakiris met the friends who had come to see Lady Maverinth at the gate, and conducted them to the sick lady. Near the bedroom, the bride met Arabella, and at once became anxious about the old lady's condition. The lady replied that she was now being examined by a physician, and had been unable to eat for a long time on account of constant spasms, so her condition had greatly deteriorated. This night Obel also slept badly. This was the state of her godmother every summer, but this time it was much worse. The palace guests entered the chambers. Mrs. Morin was lying in her bed and calling for Erica. The old woman missed her greatly and apologized for the sudden invitation. The concubine replied that even if she had been in the North End and had received the letter, she would have come here at once. Lady Morant regretted that she had taken too much upon herself and suspected that life in this world was coming to an end. The bride objected and replied that she was very important to her, and she wished the old lady to get well as soon as possible. Obel saw fit to thank the girl for being able to change Rowell. The boy's friend smiled. Arabella said that the lady should rest to gain strength sooner, to which the lady agreed and once again apologized to Erica. The guests were drinking tea in the drawing room when they talked about the old woman's condition. Lady Asante warned that as soon as her strength returned to her, everything would be as before. The sick woman should only rest and not worry, and the girl should not stay in the palace for her own safety. The bride blamed herself for not being able to be there at that moment. Arabella said goodbye, warning that they had prepared a room in the palace for the concubine. Lady Asante came to visit the sick man. Tessa said that on hot days the pain from burns increases, so they mixed the medicine and treated the wound. But Mr. Sergio's recipe does not help. From behind the door, a scream was heard. The mistress asked to take that man away. She obeyed and left. At that time, the sick man came out. The girl ordered him to return to bed. The boy objected, answering her that he was tired of lying down, because he was allowed to get up only for medical procedures. But nothing helped, and began to accuse the concubine that she left him for some emperor. Arabella asked him to stop and led him back to the bedroom. She knew he was in pain, but Mr. Sergio wasn't around. Obel wasn't well either. He needed to be patient for a little while to definitely get better. The sick man stroked the girl's hair, with the words that she was only his, and he was not going to give her to anyone, to which Lady Asante replied that she would decide for herself where and with whom she would be. The boy was tormented by the thought of being robbed of all his accomplishments, the things that belonged to him, and the place where he was supposed to be. All he had to do was cower like a mouse and keep quiet. The mistress got up and was about to leave, but the sick man grabbed her hand, asking her not to leave and stay with him. The girl said she would go and get a bag of ice for compresses and come back. With tears in her eyes, Arabella took ice with tongs and applied it to the wounds of sleeping Seth. Erica was spending time in the garden. She was sad that she had no one to talk to because Rudy had gone to meet Mr. Rakaris, but she suddenly noticed Rowell. She called out to the boy. He turned around and immediately hugged his fiancée. In the long time they hadn't seen each other, Lakiris Jr. had matured, but his smile was still the same. The friends admitted that they recently reminisced about the day they met. He asked about her well-being, because so much time had passed and many events had happened. He was worried about her. The bride told about the monastery, where she met many people from all over the world, and each of them had a different story. Rowell told that when he was 8, his grandmother took him to the palace, where she constantly hid and followed orders. The boy, 11 years, did not leave the territory. He, like Erica, dreamed of leaving here to see the world. Rudy finally found the mistress and looked apprehensively at the girl's interlocutor. Both had a suspicious face. The eunuch grudgingly seated the concubine in the carriage. Roel went to the monastery instead. On the way to the church, they discussed the surroundings and how quickly the guy was able to get out of the palace. On the way, they stopped at the market to buy groceries. Lakin Jr. was surprised by the commoners, because according to his grandmother, they were all illiterate, greedy and rude to the rest of the people. Then the merchant treated him to an apricot, even though they didn't know each other. The guy saw some sign and asked Erica to go in there. She agreed. The kind merchant showed them the mermaid's treasure, a relic of the ancient Panacea dynasty that can cure all diseases. Roel asked if he had been brought from Rapika, but the man immediately warned him that the name must not be spoken, or the mermaid would curse him. A couple of friends left the store. The guy took the girl by the hand. She immediately noticed that something was wrong. He simply replied that the mood had gone bad. Not long ago, his grandmother had allowed him to use the library and hired teachers, but Roel could only study what Lady Maverinth allowed him, and the more he read, the more he realized that he knew nothing. Erica replied that his brother was the emperor, had a wonderful grandmother, and lived in a beautiful palace. Would he need to know anything else? They had managed to get out of the castle, were in a wonderful place. The friends only had to have a good time. Out of gratitude, Roel kissed the girl's hand. The concubine reminded him that they were now nuns, and reminded him of the fact that he had pretended to be a girl before, and why he thought that if his fiancée found out the truth, she would stop being friends with him. The guy kneeled down, showering the heroine with compliments, asked to say that she didn't hate him. She confirmed his thoughts. Roel rejoiced, hugged the girl again. She asked not to lie to her anymore. The friends had been walking around the city for a long time. The guy offered his friend a drink of water. Erica understood how her friend felt. After all, she used to live locked up too. Roel offered to return to the huge, dismal house, or there was the option of staying in town for a couple more days. The concubine decided that they should return with Rudy, so they would set off at dawn tomorrow. The friends held hands and walked on when they saw 3 people. One of them asked how the prince was walking. It was quite late, and they wanted to see him off. Roel thought about the fact that no one had ever addressed him like that in the palace by a prince. He shouted for Erica to run, and the girl herself stood in a stupor. Lady Grimple ordered the bride to be caught, for if she started calling for help, there would be trouble. Roel said not to touch the girl, but they tried to reassure him that they didn't kill for nothing. And this was a day everyone had been waiting for a long time. Erica was running, not knowing what to do next, and asking for help from people passing by. One of the guys laughed that she was a fast runner, but still, she would be finished. In her head, she apologized to Karl for not being able to keep her promise. The emperor was standing behind the guy who had threatened the concubine. Erica sat in the carriage, completely slumped over. Across from her was His Majesty. The bride asked what's up with Roel. The guy was angry that the couple hadn't seen each other for a month, and she was the first to ask about his brother, but reassured that he was fine. The bride hugged her fiancé and confessed that she missed him, asking the same in return. The emperor replied that he missed her madly and wanted to see her every day, as soon as the guy heard about the concubine's arrival at the southern palace, and immediately rushed there. But once he arrived, he didn't find her there. Rudy told about his friend's plans. Karl rode out to follow them, and if it wasn't for that, they could have gotten into trouble. Erica apologized, and His Majesty warned that her brother was still in transition. The girl objected, replying that Roel knew a lot, had changed a lot, and was a very nice guy. In fact, her words pleased Karl. He was reminded again that she was his bride, and no one could ever take her away from him. Roel sat on the ground as his older brother reprimanded him, and then quickly let him go, saying that they would talk about the prank at home, for if Lady Maverinth found out about it, it might make things worse for her. The prince was warned not to believe everyone in the palace because even South Castle has spies. But here, Karl was about to leave. Erica ran to Roel to see if he was all right, and the emperor in turn said they should return to the palace, and the concubine should return to the monastery. His Majesty had warned his brother that as soon as matters in South Castle were resolved, the brothers would leave for the imperial palace. Staying at grandmother's house was to avoid attracting unnecessary attention by leaving for the main residence. The younger suggested that he himself should go to Lady Maverinth, and the lad would return discreetly with Erica. He assured her that he would disguise himself well, no one would suspect anything, and advised his brother to take a break. Roll got on his horse and rushed to the palace, the bride and groom standing in utter bewilderment.